Arya Stark had never known a city so full of secrets. From the moment she arrived in King's Landing, she felt its shadows pressing in around her like a hand sliding over her mouth, stealing her breath. The pungent odor of the Street of Steel and the grime of Flea Bottom had their own distinctive weight, but it was within the Red Keep's towering walls that she sensed the most danger, like a blade held beneath fine silks, trembling to be freed. Her father had warned her that the capital was a viper's nest. She only wished she could have realized sooner how deep the venom ran through every corridor, every whisper, every careful turn of a cloaked head. She was small for her age, though no smaller than the waif-like city children running around in tattered shirts and breeches. Her hair was often cropped too short to pin up with ribbons as Sansa did. She liked it that way. She moved more freely, her movements unencumbered by the fashions her sister adored. Arya felt her father's eyes upon her at times. He did not rebuke her tomboy spirit, but she knew he worried. Lord Eddard Stark loved all his children, but he had always looked upon Arya with a mixture of fondness and concern. Even when he taught her to trace the lines of honor in her heart and to follow them like guiding stars, he must have seen that Arya's road might be a darker one. Those first few weeks in King's Landing, she did her best to remain inconspicuous. Lessons with Syrio Farrell, the Braavosi sword master, took place in the Red Keep's unused chambers, where she was taught that swift cunning was as vital as air in one's lungs. Swift as a deer, quiet as a shadow. Mostly she used a blunted wooden sword, but she could feel her arms growing stronger, her reflexes swifter. By then, her father's downfall was quietly building around them like a tide that threatened to drown the realm. Though Arya could not see the grand design or sense the tapestry of betrayals forming, she did notice the small things, the hush in the halls, the roguish glances from men she did not trust, and the bizarre sense that her father's name, whispered from behind corners, was spoken in worry or derision. She caught her first real glimpse of trouble when she spied Peter Baelish Littlefinger exchanging quiet words with men whose eyes darted about as though they housed a swarm of wasps. She had slipped behind a column during one of her wanderings, disguised in a simple boy's tunic she'd filched from a laundry line near the kitchens. No one would suspect a scrawny boy with a smudged face of listening in on court business. But that was precisely what she was doing. When she saw Peter Baelish pass by, she knew him only as the sly-faced man who stood with the King's Council. Sansa had mentioned his name at some point, repeating overheard gossip that he was cunning beyond measure, but Arya paid little attention until that moment. As he walked, his steps clicked like a cat's claws on stone. He hummed tunelessly, a pretense that told her he was playing a game of secrecy. And indeed, not far behind him, two men in dark cloaks joined him. Arya crept closer. She could not catch every word, but snatches of conversation drifted through the hallway like a dreadful wind. Stark, watchful, after. Ned must not. The men's voices were low rumbles. Baelish gave curt nods as they spoke, flicking his glance left and right, a sign that he was more paranoid than he wished to appear. Then, turning on a single pivot, he strode away, his chin raised ever so slightly. The others melted into side passages, their tasks presumably assigned. Arya's gut twisted. She knew something was wrong, that her father, who believed in honor and justice, was trapped in a place where men valued scheming over truth, greed over loyalty. And Baelish was among the worst of them. If anyone had asked Arya how she knew, she wouldn't have had the words. It was a feeling born of the way he carried himself, the little smirk that never left his lips, the sharp flicker in his eyes when he watched people. She resolved then to keep watch on him whenever she could. It was an impulse. She was still young enough to believe that simply observing might help her father, that if she glimpsed something truly damning, she could bring it to him and they might stand united. She wanted to be useful. Her father's downfall happened so swiftly that it felt like a dream or a nightmare. Arya recalled the day her father was seized by the Gold Cloaks after he confronted Cersei's secrets. He told her and Sansa to pack for departure, to head north again. But the city had devoured him first, ripping his honor to pieces. On the day the Lannisters took him into custody for treason, Arya had been away with Syrio. She'd returned to discover the Red Keep in chaos. Sansa was sobbing. The Hound was pacing around, gazing at her with a vile curiosity. Arya had to run. Syrio, her faithful teacher, held off soldiers with nothing but a wooden sword to give her time to escape. She had done so, surviving in the labyrinth of corridors for hours, constantly searching for some thread of hope. And in the midst of it all, she heard them speak of Littlefinger's involvement. It was a swirl of half-truths, gossip from guards, or whispers among the staff. He promised Ned Stark a means to triumph, then turned on him, not to be trusted. That was all Arya needed to hear. She did not understand the intricacies of lords and ladies, but she knew what betrayal looked like. Baelish had placed a dagger to her father's throat from the shadows and watched him fall. So if Lord Eddard was locked away, it was in part due to this man's machinations. Her anger coalesced into a burning thirst for answers and retribution. But she kept her rage hidden, remembering Sirio's words, swift as a deer, quiet as a shadow. Night and day became uncertain. Arya disguised herself as best she could, taking refuge in dusty corners of the castle, ducking behind old furnishings to sleep. She scrounged for scraps in the kitchens. She once found a leftover bowl of stew that was still warm, practically a feast for a starving child. Through all this, the city's tension intensified around her. Men wearing the colors of House Lannister patrolled the keep. The Red Keep's staff looked over their shoulders at every turn. The name Ned Stark was whispered like a threat. Still, she watched for Baelish. She learned his patterns, how he'd stride through the halls in his mockingbird sigil, always accompanied by a bored expression, like a lord forced to endure the trivialities of court. She suspected he was heading to meet with the Queen, or Varys the Spider, or the Council. Each time, he whispered false sweet words that she could not wholly understand. On more than one occasion, she followed him, creeping along with a small blade in hand. Needle was lost, but she had found a short kitchen knife. She felt fiercely protective of the memory of her sword, hoping one day to claim it back. But for now, the knife was her silent companion, a meager promise of potential vengeance. She had no plan, not at first. Only a wild swirl of fury made savage by the knowledge that her father was at the mercy of these traitors. She wondered if she could slip into the dungeons, free him. But the Lannisters' men were everywhere. She had to bide her time. Like a needle lost in a haystack, she moved invisibly through the castle's cracks. She saw more than any adult might guess. Arya was not naive, but there were moments she trembled at the thought of being caught. She could almost hear her mother's voice telling her to be strong, to be a wolf. And so she was. Wolves hide in thick forests, waiting to pounce. She found her chance when she overheard something that made her blood run cold. Baelish was standing in a cramped corridor near the Great Hall, conferring with a guard loyal to him, a gaunt-faced man named Trebor or Trafer she couldn't quite catch. Arya was pressed against a bend in the wall. She clutched the hilt of her little knife so hard her knuckles turned white. The conversation was too low for her to catch every word, but she gathered the gist. Ned Stark's fate was almost sealed. He has to confess, Baelish said, his tone smooth as water. Then the Boy King will show mercy and the realm will remain stable. At least that is what they want. He laughed quietly, a mirthless sound. He'll lose his head the moment that confession leaves his lips or soon after. There is no other path for him. No mercy in this game. Arya's heart pounded. They were going to kill her father. She'd suspected it, but hearing it confirmed by the man whose sly grin had once seemed so harmless unleashed a flood of panic and wrath that clenched her stomach into knots. A part of her wanted to leap out right then, bury her blade in his ribs, and run. But that wouldn't save her father. She forced herself to remain hidden, taking silent steps away. The corridors seemed to spin. At some point, she realized tears were streaming down her cheeks. She missed her father so much, and this was the final blow. She had to do something. She couldn't wait for rescue from the outside. No one was coming. She recalled a conversation with Sirio. A time may come when you stand alone, and in that time, you must remember that fear cuts deeper than swords. Fear was a blade at her throat now, compelled her to act. So she devised a plan, an imperfect one, formed out of desperation. She would get to Baelish, find out exactly when and how her father's death was planned, and if possible, force him to lead her to her father or reveal how to save him. The plan was half-formed. She did not yet consider how a child might threaten a lord who probably had guards at his beck and call. But she had grown bolder. Necessity fueled her. She would lie, steal, or kill if she had to. The hour of opportunity arrived on the day Baelish was alone in an antechamber near the throne room. Arya had slipped inside that part of the keep earlier, searching for vantage points to spy on the ongoing business in the Great Hall. King Joffrey was presiding over some matter of coin, and Baelish had left the dais to speak to a steward about finances. The steward eventually darted off with hurried steps, leaving Baelish momentarily unoccupied. Arya crouched behind a tall pillar. She noticed that there were no Lannister guards in this small corridor, though some might pass by at any moment. She would have to be quick. But what to do? Her heart hammered as she recalled her father's face, the last time she'd seen him truly free, telling her to keep up with her lessons with Sirio. If she acted now, maybe she could glean something to help him, or at least do something. A hush fell, as though the corridor itself held its breath. Arya lunged forward, swift as a deer, just as Syrio had taught her. 1 step, 2 steps. Her little knife pressed into Baelish's back. He nearly jumped, but she pressed the point in enough that he froze. Shock etched across his features, and he started to turn his head to see who had ambushed him. Arya spoke in a low voice, trying to sound calmer, more menacing than she felt. "Don't move," she said. She prayed her voice did not shake. He glanced over his shoulder. His eyes narrowed as he saw a small figure. "Why, if it isn't—" he began in a soft, coaxing tone. "Don't say my name," she whispered harshly, panic swirling in her gut. She was half certain he would call for guards, but she pressed the knife into him again. She took a step behind him, so she was almost out of his line of sight. "You betrayed my father. You're going to tell me how to save him." A beat of silence. Then Baelish chuckled. "My dear child, if you kill me now, you'll never see your father's head remain on his shoulders. Do you think a slip of a girl with a dull blade can scare me into—" He tried to spin, presumably to seize her arm, but Arya jerked away nimbly, slicing a line across his sleeve in the process. She felt it scrape flesh. Baelish hissed in pain. Adrenaline spiked in Arya's veins, and she moved around him in quick arcs, brandishing the knife as Syrio had taught her, though that had been with a wooden sword. She prayed the fundamentals were enough. He pressed a hand to the shallow wound, a drop of blood seeping between his fingers. For a moment, that mask of cunning slipped, replaced by pure anger. "You'll pay for that," he said, a hiss of a whisper. But he did not shout for the guards. Perhaps he believed he could handle her himself, or perhaps he did not want to alert them to something he could not easily explain. After all, how would it look if Peter Baelish was discovered being held at knife point by a child? "You'll take me to him," she said again. The words sounded bolder than she felt. "Show me where he is." Baelish dabbed at his wound. "He's in the dungeons, waiting for the king's justice. What do you think you can do about that? Rescue him? You wouldn't last a minute in the black cells." Arya's fear threatened to claw out of her. She knew the black cells were heavily guarded. "If he's going to die anyway, I'll settle for killing you," she said. The coldness in her voice surprised even herself. "I know it was your fault. They said you turned on him. 1 word from you, and he would have been saved." Baelish raised an eyebrow, brushing an invisible speck of dust from his doublet. "My dear, sweet girl," he said, the mocking tone returning. "You know so little of this game, but it's true. I did what I had to do. Lord Stark was not suited for the capital. He's too honorable. He never played the game well enough." He paused, a smile ghosting across his lips. "You, on the other hand, are playing a dangerous one. What is your plan, truly? To drag me to the dungeons at knife point?" She steeled herself. A breath, too. Her heart thundered. If she delayed too long, guards would come upon them. Then it would be over. Her father would die, and she'd be next. "You'll take me there in secret," she said, as though it was that simple. "Then you'll talk. You'll talk, or I'll cut your throat." He laughed. "You wouldn't be the first to threaten me with a blade, but you are undoubtedly the youngest." His eyes darted around, looking for a means to disarm her or to call for help. "But let us say you do kill me. That would not be kind to your father, or to yourself." Arya realized that every passing second increased the chance they'd be discovered. Instinct took over, shaped by her fear and fury. She darted in. He tried to bat the blade aside, but she had spent hours and hours with Syrio, and though it was hardly the experience of a Bravosi master, it was enough to let her twist her slender body away from his grasps. She struck out with the knife, aiming at his stomach. Baelish twisted. The blade sank into his side, and he let out a muffled cry. Arya gasped, feeling the jarring vibration travel up her arm. She almost let go of the knife. Part of her wanted to. She had never stabbed a man before, never felt the hot rush of blood welling from a wound. But the part of her that was a wolf held on. He staggered, stumbling against the wall, eyes wide in pain. "7 hells," he breathed. You savage little..." She pulled the knife free. Blood spattered across her tunic. Her mind spun. She had thought the threat alone might suffice. But Baelish was cunning, he would not fold so easily. Now she had stabbed him. Her soul trembled, but she pressed forward. She set the blade to his throat. "Tell me," she whispered, though she wasn't certain what more she wanted him to say. He had already revealed that her father was to die. Did she think he had a plan to free him? Did she want him to call it off somehow? He stared at her, a mixture of pain and disdain on his face. "Why would I help you?" "It's over for him," he spat. "He's a dead man." A small laugh escaped him, humorless, tinted with blood on his lips. "Even if you somehow snuck into the dungeon, there are a dozen men, half a dozen more at each turn. You can't." Arya pressed the knife deeper, and the threat in her eyes must have been real enough that he didn't finish his sentence. She felt tears burn in the back of her eyes. She thought of Sansa somewhere in the keep, likely terrified for their father's life. She thought of Robb in Winterfell, who might be riding south with an army if news had reached him. She thought of her father alone in a cell. And then she stared into Baelish's calculating gaze. "You'll find a way," she said, but her voice wavered. She was not a torturer or an interrogator. She was a frightened child trying to perform an adult's act. But desperation can be a fierce ally. Baelish watched her carefully, clearly trying to figure out how best to twist the situation. At last he said, "Let me go and I'll find a way to see him. I'll whisper to the queen. I can counsel her to show him mercy. I can you." A spike of revulsion went through Arya. She realized how worthless his promises were. Peter Baelish would say anything to save himself. The entire court was his stage, each promise a manipulative ploy. She took a step back, drawing him away from the wall, the knife still pressed at his throat. To any onlooker, it would be a bizarre sight, Baelish pinned by a tiny, dirt-faced girl. He tried to back away, but that only pushed him more firmly against Arya's point. She could feel her own sweat beating on her forehead. She thought fleetingly of how her father would never approve of her killing a man in cold blood if there were another way. But he was set to die, and the man pinned before her was partly to blame. Maybe if she threatened him enough, forced him to put a plan in place. But how? How could she trust him not to double-cross her? The city hummed with lies. He would turn on her in a blink if it gained him power or saved his own skin. He must have sensed her hesitation. "There's a better way," he said quickly, eyes flicking with cunning. "I'll help you smuggle in a." His sentence ended in a groan. She had pressed the blade deeper, feeling the blade begin to bite into his flesh. "Stop lying," she hissed. "Stop it." Her voice cracked, tears mingling with the sweat on her cheeks. She had wanted a plan, but now all she felt was rage. "You'll betray me, just like you betrayed him." He opened his mouth, perhaps to scream for help, but her hand clamped over his lips. She bit her tongue, trying to quell the wave of terror. She was in too deep. She either had to let him go or finish this here and now. If she let him go, everything would be lost. He would alert the guards, ensuring Ned Stark's death was even swifter. And if she let him live and tried to use him, how could she hope to keep him under control? She was only one small girl. The weight of it seemed to crush her. She saw an image in her mind, her father kneeling before a jeering crowd, sword raised above his neck. She saw Baelish wearing that smug grin, all cunning and satisfaction. He would be a hand behind that death, and he would do it in a heartbeat if it improved his standing. Something cold and resolute formed in her chest. "You deserve this," she said in a whisper. "You deserve worse." She sliced the blade across Baelish's throat, a quick motion meant to be sure. She had never done such a thing before, but she had seen the merciful slice in Winterfell's traditions, that single blow offered to animals for a clean death. Baelish staggered, his mouth opening in a silent gurgle, blood pouring from the wound. He tried to speak, but no words came. His hands went to his throat as though to keep his life from spilling out. He sank to his knees, the once slick confidence of the master of coin reduced to a wet rattle. He stared at Arya with a look of bewildered horror. In that moment, Arya was too stunned to move. She had done it. She had killed a man. The corridor seemed to hold its breath. He fell to the floor, and Arya felt everything slow to an unbearable crawl. The bright, wet spatter contrasted sharply with the torchlit stones. A wave of nausea hit her, her vision blurred with tears. She had imagined killing him so many times in her mind, righteous vengeance for her father, but the reality was beyond anything her youthful imagination had conjured. It was terrifying, irreversible, and she felt sure the gods would never let her soul go unburdened. Peter Baelish died before her eyes, twitching for a few final seconds before going still. She realized that any moment, a guard might come around the corner. She also realized that no one else had seen what she'd done. A staggering mixture of relief and panic seized her. "I have to go," she whispered to herself. Her voice cracked. She looked down at Baelish's body, the blood pooling around him. She wanted to say something, a prayer for the dead, but her heart hammered in her chest. She had to run. So she ran, as swiftly and quietly as she could. She tucked the knife away beneath her tunic, ignoring the warmth of blood still on her hands. She fled through the winding passages, up the narrow steps used by servants. She passed no one, fortunately, or no one who cared to question her. When at last she collapsed into a hidden alcove behind a statue, breath ragged, she realized that her entire body was trembling. She looked at her hands, trembling violently, and saw the streaks of crimson, Littlefinger's blood. She shuddered, thinking how easy it had been. Far too easy. She wanted to cry, to throw up, to call out for her father. But she swallowed those screams, stuffing them deep inside. She was alone. There was no time to brood. She realized that Baelish's body would be found soon. The entire keep would be on alert. Killing a lord was no minor crime. Arya had to escape or at least find a safer hiding place. Her first thought was that she had likely doomed her father. The Lannisters would certainly not be kinder to Ned if they learned Arya had killed a member of the small council. In fact, it might hasten the execution. Panic choked her. She bit down on her lip to keep from sobbing. She had avenged her father, but had she sealed his doom in the process? She remembered that Baelish had said no one could free her father from the Black Cells, not while the Lannisters reigned. Despite her guilt, a spark of savage satisfaction flickered within her. Baelish had earned his fate. She replayed the moment when that cunning smirk finally vanished from his face. The moment of retribution was fleeting, overshadowed by the knowledge that she was more alone than ever. Night fell over King's Landing, and the rumor of Lord Baelish's murder spread like wildfire. Whispers drifted. Littlefinger found with his throat slit in a corridor. No sign of the killer. The guards suspect a disgruntled cell's word. And so on. Arya heard it all from the hidden vantage points she had memorized. She saw how the courtiers looked at each other, wondering if some new assassin or threat lurked among them. She doubted anyone suspected a young girl. The city was too used to conspiracies, and Baelish had countless enemies. Still, it didn't take long for Lannister guards to flood the corridors in search of suspects. Joffrey was outraged. He had lost a valuable advisor, and that could not go unpunished. The queen was no less furious, though she wore her anger with a cool, practiced mask. Arya tried to consider if she could still rescue her father. She thought of creeping into the dungeons at night, but they were now doubling the watch, especially after Baelish's death. The king was determined to prevent any further attacks on the crown's stability. Tension soared. Arya, sleepless, haunted by the image of Baelish's dying eyes, drifted around the keep like a restless ghost. She did not have the means or skill to free Ned Stark on her own. The city was on high alert, but still she waited. If an opportunity arose, she would seize it. She was there when they finally brought Ned Stark forth for his confession, standing on the steps of the Great September of Baelor with the crowd pressing in around them. Arya perched precariously on the edge of a statue's base, trying to remain inconspicuous. Her throat felt tight as she watched her father forced out before the throng. He was thinner, paler, but there was a quiet dignity in his eyes that made Arya's breath catch. She had never loved him more than in that moment. She longed to rush forward to cling to him, but she stayed still, tears brimming. She saw the false king, Joffrey, smirking on his dais. She heard the roar of the crowd. She saw Sansa too, face ashen, trembling at the foot of the dais. Everything was heartbreakingly inevitable. Ned Stark confessed to treasons he had not committed, his voice wavering as he spoke. Arya wanted to close her ears. She knew he was doing it to protect them, possibly hoping for mercy that the queen had promised. But Joffrey's thirst for cruelty could not be sated by mere submission. They dragged Ned to the block, the crowd gasping. Sansa screamed. Arya felt time slow as she realized the sword was raised. Baelish's death had changed none of this. She had done everything and nothing. She tried to move, to leap down. She thought perhaps if she caused a distraction. But the stroke was swift. Ice, the great sword that once belonged to her father, gleamed in the light as Ser Islandpain brought it down. Arya forced herself to look away, tears blurring her vision. Her father's final moment was drowned out by the roar of the crowd, the shriek of Sansa, and the hammer of Arya's own heart. She sank to her knees on the stone ledge. She could not breathe. She had failed. She had killed Baelish in the desperate hope of saving her father, but in the end, nothing could hold back the tide of Joffrey's cruelty. The city reeled around her, the crowd surging in horror and excitement. Arya wanted to vanish into darkness. She fled the scene, stumbling through the alleys behind the September. People were too distracted by the spectacle to notice a small, ragged girl pushing past them. Her stomach felt hollow, her eyes burned. She no longer cared who saw her. She only wanted to be anywhere but here. Her father was gone, beheaded. She had no one. Baelish's blood on her conscience felt like a branding. She had to escape King's Landing or die. She found an empty stable, collapsed behind a row of dusty crates, and wept until she was empty inside. In the stillness that followed, she realized she was truly alone. In the days that followed, Arya discovered the city had grown more dangerous. Word had spread that Ned Stark was executed, Baelish was murdered, and the realm was in upheaval. The Lannisters were preparing for war against her brother Robb, who was marching south. People said that the North was rising in anger. Arya listened from her hiding spots, gathering scraps of information. She learned from stray gossip that some men had been ordered to search for her specifically. Arya Stark had vanished, and the Lannisters wanted her alive or dead. One rumor said the Hound was eager to find her. Another said it was a group of gold-cloaked officers commanded to tear the city apart. She realized they wanted the Starks fully eradicated. King Joffrey was not kind enough to let a potential threat live. Her movements had to be cunning. She disguised herself more fully, cutting her hair shorter, smearing dirt on her face. She found half-rotten bread in a gutter behind a bakery. It was better than starving. She avoided the main streets, traveling by back alleys, listening for talk of a northbound caravan or some group leaving the city. If she could stow away, perhaps she might find her way back to Winterfell, or at least away from the capital. Every day was a challenge. She avoided the watchful eyes of knights who might recognize her if she so much as let them get a good look at her face. Now and then, she remembered Baelish's final moments. Oddly enough, that memory sometimes gave her courage. She had committed herself to a path of survival and retribution. Baelish had been the first name on her kill list, though she had not framed it as such until later. Now, in the silence of the night, with the city's rancid smells swirling around her, she would whisper the names of those who had wronged her family. Joffrey, Cersei, Island Payne, the Hound, and others. The list grew, but the first name had already been crossed out by her hand. Peter Baelish. She thought of it bitterly. His death had come too late to save her father. One rainy night, she heard that a recruiter for the Night's Watch was gathering volunteers, mostly criminals and orphans, to bring north along the King's Road. The man's name was Yoren. Arya recognized the name from her father's talk of the Black Brothers. She took a risk and approached him quietly as he made camp outside the city walls, just beyond the Mudgate. Yoren was a gruff, bearded man, stinking of ale, but his eyes were not unkind. He asked her name. She lied at first, calling herself Arya, but when he studied her face, suspicion flickered in his gaze. Yet he did not press her for the truth, only grunted that she looked hungry and offered her a place with the recruits if she kept quiet and did as she was told. Arya, too exhausted to argue, nodded. A spark of relief lit inside her. This was her chance to leave King's Landing behind. She joined Yoren's group that night, slipping into a wagon among rough men and boys who eyed her with mistrust. But no one recognized her as a highborn lady, nor guessed that she was the daughter of the man they had all seen executed. She was just another orphan of the war, one of many. She did not speak to them much. She wrapped herself in a threadbare cloak, ignoring the jostle of the wagon. She felt numb, drifting in a haze of guilt, grief, and a simmering anger that refused to die. They traveled north, passing towns and villages uneasy with news of war. Yoren told them to keep their heads down, not to stir trouble. One evening, around a campfire, Arya overheard some of the men discussing the chaos in the capital. Heard that Littlefinger was murdered right in the keep, said a thin man with a missing ear. Slit from ear to ear, they say. Another man spat into the fire. Couldn't have happened to a nicer fellow, he said. Peter Baelish was scum. He owned too many brothels, owed too many debts. The rest of the men chuckled grimly. Arya said nothing, her face turned away from the flickering flames, but she clutched her cloak tighter around herself, remembering how it had felt to hold the knife to Baelish's throat. She felt no satisfaction, only a hollow acceptance that she was part of the violence now. At times, she pondered how the realm was reacting to Baelish's death. Who would inherit his titles and property? Would men question who had done it? Did Sansa know? Arya doubted Sansa would suspect her. It all felt unreal. She was too focused on survival now, keeping her true identity hidden, learning how to handle a sword if only she could find one that fit her hand like Needle had. She had no illusions about returning to a normal life. She was a fugitive like the criminals around her. Days stretched into weeks. Arya's nightmares were relentless, featuring her father's execution or Baelish's blood-soaked betrayal. She sometimes woke in a cold sweat, biting her lip to keep from crying out. But with each passing day, the memory of the kill grew less raw. She carried it like a secret wound that had begun to scab over. It was part of her now. She recited her nightly prayers, listing the names of those she would kill if she ever got the chance: Joffrey, Cersei, the Hound, Island Pain. Her father's ghost seemed to watch her in those moments, neither condemning nor approving, but present in her mind, reminding her that she was a Stark, that she must find a way to endure. She sometimes added Varys and Pycelle, uncertain of their roles but believing them complicit. But Baelish's name was absent from that litany. He was gone. Her first kill. They continued north, passing the ruins of war. Columns of smoke rose from burned farms. Some refugees joined the roads, telling horror stories of Lannister raids. Arya gleaned from them that Robb Stark was winning victories, capturing men like Jaime Lannister, but that the war had only begun. Through it all, she kept her identity hidden. One evening, the group encountered a minor lord loyal to the Lannisters who demanded to see Yoren's travelers. Arya's heart pounded as the man's men-at-arms strode among them, looking each boy up and down. But they did not linger on Arya. She was too dirty, too small, too unremarkable to be the famous missing girl. If only they knew how dangerous she had become. The encounter made her realize that if she reached Winterfell or beyond, she might meet her family again. But she also considered the possibility that Winterfell itself might be unsafe. The war was raging everywhere. Her mother and Robb were likely in the field. Bran and Rickon were back in Winterfell, or so she hoped. She ached to see them, to feel some semblance of normalcy. But her father's death had shattered her illusions. Perhaps there was no going back. They approached Harrenhal eventually, a place rumored to be cursed. Yoren led them onward, but they found the region in chaos. Armies roamed near the God's Eye. Arya shivered at the sight of the melted towers of Harrenhal from a distance, feeling a subtle dread. From whispered rumors, she learned that Lady Whent had fled, that Lannisters or other forces had taken the fortress. Yoren decided to alter their route, circling around the worst of the fighting. They skirted the roads, traveling through thick forests where the nights were cold and the trees sighed with the wind. Arya began to wonder if she would ever find her family or if she was doomed to drift among strangers. At a crossroads inn, they encountered a group of soldiers under the sigil of the Lion. Arya tensed, certain they would be caught. But Yoren, with practiced patience, gave them some coin for safe passage. The soldiers teased the recruits, calling them crows and crows' refuse, but let them go on their way. None recognized Arya. She thanked whatever gods might be listening. Days later, Yoren took her aside at camp. He sat her on a log by the fire, away from the others. "You're no ordinary boy," he said gruffly, chewing on a piece of straw. "Could see that from the moment you came to me." Arya forced herself not to fidget. "I've been hearing rumors," he continued, his eyes flicking to her face. "They say Ned Stark had 2 daughters in King's Landing. One was betrothed to the king and the other vanished. Some say she was whisked away by traitors, others say she was killed. But I suspect you might know more about that." Arya's mouth went dry. She didn't speak. Yoren sighed. "I knew your father. He was a good man. Damned shame what happened. The realm's the worse for losing him." Arya stared at the ground, her throat aching. "He tried to keep things honorable," Yoren went on, "but there's no honor in King's Landing, only survival. I'm sorry you had to see what you did." For a moment, Arya's facade cracked. She trembled. "They killed him," she whispered. "They were always going to kill him. Maybe not." He shook his head. "Royal politics are messy. Baelish was found dead too, heard that news from a traveler. 'Twas a surprise." He glanced at her, curiosity in his eyes. "Some say the Lannisters tried to pin it on House Stark. Others say it was one of Baelish's many enemies." Arya swallowed hard, still saying nothing. She braced herself, waiting for him to accuse her. But Yoren just shrugged. "Reckon there's plenty of blame to go around. The man was no friend to the North, that's for sure." Then he scratched his stubbly chin. I won't pry into your secrets, boy. Or girl. Doesn't matter to me. The Night's Watch is a place for folks to start anew. But if we come across your kin, or if you want me to help you find them, just say the word." The kindness in his voice made Arya's eyes sting. She did not deserve kindness, she thought, not after she had slit a man's throat in a corridor. But she was grateful. She simply nodded, unable to speak. Yoren patted her shoulder and rose, leaving her to her thoughts. In that moment, she felt a glimmer of something she hadn't felt in a long while, a hope. There was still a thread of decency in the world, even amid the bloodshed. That night, she dreamed of Winterfell. She saw her father in the Godwood cleaning ice after carrying out a just sentence. He turned to her, smiling gently, as if to say, "You are my child, and I love you." She ran toward him, but the dream shifted, and in his place stood Petyr Baelish, throat sliced, eyes pleading. Arya woke with a gasp, tears wet on her cheeks. She stared into the darkness of the campsite, her breath ragged. The memory of that corridor was like a brand, a mark that she could never wash away. But she whispered her nightly chant, naming off those she considered her true enemies, determined that if the chance arose, she would not hesitate again. They made it past Harrenhal, traveling through farmland that was increasingly barren as small folk fled or hid from marauding soldiers. Her days became a haze of trudging through mud, sleeping in ill-shielded campsites, and trying not to dwell on the past. It was no easy existence, but she learned resilience. She practiced with wooden sticks when no one was looking, stepping lightly on the balls of her feet, remembering Sirio's teachings. She never wanted to be taken by surprise again. Sometimes the other recruits taunted her for her small size or her intense stare, but she ignored them or met their remarks with a glare that silenced them. One evening they camped near a little stream. Arya waded into the water to wash off some of the grime that clung to her like a second skin. As the cold water splashed against her, she thought of that day in King's Landing, the day she had changed her life forever. She tried to see if she felt regret. A part of her did regret that her father was gone, regret that she hadn't done something differently to actually save him, regret that she had stooped to murdering a man. But another part of her felt an odd sense of justice. Petyr Baelish had orchestrated the betrayal. If men were to die for that treachery, better it was him than her father. If only it had made a difference. Sansa's face floated through her mind. Sansa had adored the fairy tales of knights and ladies. She had believed in the courtesy of the court. Baelish's death might have robbed Sansa of any illusions that the capital was a safe place, if she had any illusions left after seeing their father's execution. Arya wondered if Sansa hated her, or if Sansa was even still alive. The Lannisters would want to use Sansa for their own ends. Arya felt a pang of guilt for leaving her behind, but there had been no choice. She was sure the Lannisters would keep Sansa under close watch, either as a hostage or a potential bride for Joffrey. A wave of anger rolled over Arya at the thought. When she emerged from the stream, she sensed movement. She looked up to see Yoren standing near the trees, not watching her so much as keeping guard. "Gather your gear," he said quietly. "We're moving on soon." His eyes flicked across her and he nodded. "Keep your strength up. You'll need it." She nodded back, reading the unspoken message in his eyes. "I know who you are, but I'll keep your secret." Their journey continued. The next major settlement was in the Riverlands, a place ravaged by skirmishes. Smoke rose in the distance. Yoren told T. He grouped they'd detour to avoid conflict. While traveling a narrow road, they stumbled upon a grim sight, bodies hanging from a tree, likely small folk who had tried to resist a band of armed men. Arya forced herself to look, to remember that this was the reality of war. She turned away only when she tasted bile. They pressed on, weary and anxious. By the time they reached a fork in the road, Yoren decided that it might be wiser to split the group. He had business collecting more recruits in some nearby villages. He needed to move quickly, but traveling in a large group attracted attention. He selected a few recruits to accompany him while sending others along with a man named Polliver, one of the watch escorts. Arya was told to remain with Polliver's group, though something in her gut tensed at the man's name. She remembered hearing rumors of his cruelty, but she had little choice. The band parted ways, Yoren giving Arya a last look that seemed to say, "Stay safe." Unfortunately, with Yoren gone, the group's discipline frayed. Polliver was short-tempered. He berated the recruits, threatening them if they didn't obey. Arya sensed a dangerous tension. One night, Polliver got drunk and started demanding that the recruits turn out their pockets. He was searching for anything of value. Arya gritted her teeth, wishing Yoren hadn't left her behind. But she had no illusions about how small she was. If Polliver turned on her, the best she could do was slip away in the dark. And that was exactly what she resolved to do. So before dawn, when Polliver and the others were still snoring, she quietly took what meager supplies she had, wrapped them in a tattered cloth, and vanished into the woods. It was risky traveling alone, but a greater risk to stay with a man like Polliver who wore cruelty on his sleeve. She slipped away beneath the moonlight, determined to find her own path north, or at least away from these men. If Yoren returned, he would wonder where she'd gone, but she couldn't wait for him. For days, Arya walked alone. Hunger gnawed at her. She drank from streams, ate berries and roots when she could identify them, even scavenged a half-rotted apple from an abandoned orchard. She had no map. She relied on the sun and the shape of the land to guide her, hoping she wouldn't stray too far west or east. At night, she huddled under logs or hidden clearings, hearing wolves howling in the distance. The first time she heard that, her heart clenched with longing. She thought of Nymeria, her lost direwolf. Were those normal wolves or Nymeria's pack? She called out softly, but only the echoes answered. Her solitude weighed on her, but she trudged on. Memories of Baelish's death sometimes intruded, as did the memory of her father's last moments. She caught herself whispering her kill list at night, letting her hatred be a shield against loneliness. She told herself that eventually she'd find her way to Robb or to Winterfell. She refused to let despair swallow her. She was forging her own path through a dense thicket when she stumbled upon a camp of men. She froze, hiding behind a tree, but the men had already heard her approach. They called out, "Who goes there?" She peered through the leaves. Their cloaks bore the sigil of House Tully, a silver trout on red and blue. The Tullys were her mother's kin. Relief flooded her. She stepped forward cautiously, arms raised to show she was unarmed, though she still had her small knife tucked away. "I'm just a traveler," she said in a low voice, her heart pounding. The men regarded her suspiciously. "A traveler? What's your name, boy?" one of them asked, a burly man with a short beard. She hesitated. "Arya." That was the name she had been giving. The man narrowed his eyes. "We're sworn to the Riverlords. This land is dangerous for a lone boy." Arya nodded. She contemplated revealing herself, but fear held her back. Then one of the men stepped forward, noticing her face in the shifting firelight. "He's just a child," the man said. "No threat." That night, they shared their meager rations with her. She learned they were a scouting party for the forces loyal to Robb Stark, camped not too far from the twins. Arya's pulse quickened. Robb was near. She considered telling them who she was, but something in her rebelled at the idea of surrendering her identity so easily. She had grown used to secrecy. Besides, if they doubted her, it might cause more problems. She decided to wait until she reached Robb's main host. If she could find him, he would recognize her in an instant. So she traveled with them. They were not unkind, though they grumbled about an extra mouth to feed. They teased her for her scrawniness and tested her skill with a stick once or twice, but she held her own better than they expected, which earned her a sliver of respect. Within days, they approached a gathering of tents and banners along the green fork of the Trident. Arya saw the direwolf banner among them and felt her heart surge. This was Robb's army. She was so close. After all this time. She parted ways with the scouting party at the edge of the camp. They didn't care what she did as long as she wasn't a spy. Arya trudged through rows of tents, ignoring the stares from soldiers. She looked like a beggar in her ragged cloak, but inside her chest was a swirling storm of fear and hope. She had no proof of who she was. What if they didn't believe her? A group of guards halted her before she reached the command tent. "Halt, boy. State your business," one of them barked. She swallowed. The moment of truth had arrived. Should she keep lying or speak plainly? She mustered her courage. "I'm Arya Stark," she said in a firm voice. The men burst into laughter. The guard grabbed her arm. "Arya Stark is either dead or lost, and you're no highborn lady," he scoffed, looking her up and down. She glared at him, jerking her arm away. "I can prove it," she insisted. "Take me to Robb. He'll recognize me." The guard rolled his eyes. "That's enough. Run along before we thrash you for insulting House Stark with that lie." He shoved her back. Arya stumbled, fury building. She looked around, spotting an older knight stepping out of a nearby tent. He wore Stark colors. She recognized him, Ser Helman Tallheart, a sworn man of Winterfell. Desperate, she sprinted toward him. The guards yelled for her to stop, but she ducked around them. She collided with the knight, who grunted in surprise. "Ser Helman," she gasped, tears in her eyes. "It's me, Arya. Arya Stark. Please, you have to help me." The man frowned, pushing her back, but then his eyes took in her face. She saw confusion flicker across his features, then recognition. He grabbed her by the shoulders and studied her, disbelief written on his brow. Arya's heart raced. The guards rushed up, but he waved them off. Ser Helman shook his head. Could it be? He recognized the shape of her nose, her eyes. He had seen Arya playing in Winterfell's courtyard. "Gods be good," he breathed. "Arya?" She nearly sobbed with relief. "Yes, it's me. I escaped from the city," her voice wavered. She couldn't form more words. The stress of the past weeks threatened to crash over her in that moment. But Hellman held her upright. He barked at the guards, "Fools. Can't you see who this is? Inform the young wolf at once. Ned Stark's daughter has returned." They hurried her into Robb's presence. He was in a large command tent, surrounded by northern lords discussing strategy. Arya peered through the throng of men until she saw him, tall, broad-shouldered, wearing armor that made him look older than his years. His hair was longer, curly auburn. When he turned at their commotion, his eyes fell on Arya. She saw the swirl of shock and joy. He rushed forward, ignoring the stares of his bannermen, and enveloped her in a fierce hug. She buried her face in his breastplate, finally letting the tears flow. She had reached her family at last. Robb dismissed the others, wanting privacy. He led Arya to a quieter corner of the tent where she told him everything, well, almost everything. She told him how she escaped, how she'd wandered among the peasant folks and joined Yoren's band. She told him about her father's final moments, though it tore her heart to speak of it, and how she saw Sansa at the Great September, powerless to stop it. She omitted the part where she killed Baelish at first, uncertain how Robb would react. Instead, she said she had to run, that the city turned on them. Robb listened, tears in his own eyes as he heard the tale. He held her hands gently, as if afraid she might vanish again. "We thought you dead," he said softly, voice thick with emotion. "Mother and we heard so many conflicting reports. We've been searching for you. Every raven we sent for news returned with rumors. But now you're here. You're safe." Arya nodded, though she didn't feel entirely safe. She was in a war camp, after all, and the Lannisters would come. "What about Sansa?" she asked. "Is she here?" Robb's gaze darkened. "No. She's still in King's Landing, betrothed to that monster Joffrey. We can't free her unless we force the Lannisters to yield." Arya swallowed. She asked about their brothers, Bran and Rickon. They were safe in Winterfell, for the moment, under the guard of Maester Luwin and loyal men. She felt relief at that. Then she glanced away, biting her lip. She thought about the weight of her secret. "Robb," she said quietly, "there's something else I need to tell you." He frowned in concern. "What is it, Arya?" Her mouth felt dry. She took a breath, remembering how Baelish's body slumped to the ground. "I killed someone," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Someone in the Red Keep. Peter Baelish, he betrayed father, so she couldn't finish the sentence, but Robb's eyes went wide. She forced herself to continue. "I had a knife. I stabbed him. I cut his throat. I wanted to save father, to make Baelish help me free him, but it didn't work, and..." Robb's face went pale. He placed his hands on her shoulders. She could see the swirl of emotions in his eyes, horror, shock, confusion, perhaps a flicker of relief. "Gods," he breathed. "Baelish was a lord. Arya, you're just a girl. How?" He didn't finish the sentence, but she could feel the sorrow in his voice. She mustered a shaky smile. "I had to." He would have stopped at nothing to see father dead. He was part of it. And I don't regret it. Not really. She inhaled, a tear slipping down her cheek. He was part of why father died. Robb closed his eyes for a moment, seeming to process it. At last, he pulled her into another embrace, cradling the back of her head with his hand as if she were a frightened child. "You did what you had to do," he murmured. "I'm sorry you had to do it. None of this should have happened." His voice quivered. "If only I could have gotten there in time." Arya clung to him, feeling a mixture of relief and sorrow flood her. She had feared that Robb would recoil from her. But instead, he held her tighter. In that moment, Arya felt for the first time that maybe she could bear the weight of what she had done. She was still haunted, but she was not alone anymore. In the days that followed, Arya stayed close to Robb's side. The northern lords were surprised to learn that she was alive. Men like the great Jon slapped their thighs in approval, praising the wolf blood in her that allowed her to survive. Others looked at her with wary eyes, knowing that if she was recognized by the Lannisters, they might intensify their aggression. But none denied that her presence was a boon for the morale of the Northmen. Another Stark among them was a symbol of their rightful cause. Arya listened to the war councils. She learned how strategy was formed. How Robb intended to outmaneuver Tywin Lannister, how they aimed to split the Lannister forces or capture key strongholds in the Riverlands. She found herself fascinated by the talk of battles, of flanking maneuvers and supply lines. A small part of her thirsted to fight. She remembered Sirio's lessons, the brief flash of her father's blade, the final blow on Baelish. The more she thought about it, the more she realized that she was not content to be idle. She wanted to stand by her brother's side, but Robb was adamant that she stay behind the lines, for her own safety. Arya chafed at the idea, her rebellious spirit alive and well. She did not want to be caged in a tent. She had survived alone all this time. She believed she could be useful as a scout or messenger. At the very least, she could wield a blade if threatened. Robb refused initially, determined to protect her. "You're my sister," he said softly, "and I just got you back. I can't risk losing you again." That night, alone in her small corner of Robb's tent, Arya wrestled with frustration. She silently repeated her kill list. Baelish was gone, but so many remained. She wanted to help her brother free Sansa, avenge their father, and restore honor to the North. Instead, she was sidelined. She could not bear the thought of being locked away or hidden while the men fought. She was no lady of the court like Sansa had tried to be. She was Arya, the wolf girl. Before dawn, she made a decision. She confronted Robb in a hushed tone. "You can't keep me hidden forever," she said, her chin raised defiantly. "I'm not asking to join the front lines, but let me learn. Let me ride with the outriders or train with your men. I can handle a sword better than most boys. Ask them if you doubt me." Robb's jaw set. He looked exhausted, the burden of command heavy on him. "Arya, you don't understand how dangerous it is. No, you don't understand. I've lived with danger every day since Father's death. I survived on my own. I didn't come here just to be locked away." She kept her voice steady, refusing to cry. "Robb, please. I know how to fight, at least a little. I want to help." He sighed, rubbing his eyes. "You're as stubborn as Jon sometimes," he said, a flicker of affection in his gaze. Finally, he conceded a small compromise. "Very well. You may train with a few of my men in the camp. And if we dispatch outriders for reconnaissance, I'll consider letting you accompany them, provided it's safe enough." He raised a hand before she could protest. "That's my final offer. I won't have you marching in the thick of battle." A surge of triumph and gratitude coursed through Arya. She embraced him, ignoring his disgruntled sigh that she was pressing on his battered armor. "Thank you," she whispered. It was not everything she wanted, but it was a start. In the days that followed, Arya trained with Northmen who initially found it odd that a lord's daughter wanted to spar. But they soon discovered she had a ferocious will, and she already knew the basics of water dancing from Syrio-Farrell. Though the men didn't understand the Braavosi style, they recognized skill when they saw it. They corrected her stance where needed, taught her new sword forms, and shaped her raw determination into something sharper. She pushed herself mercilessly, as if every blow she struck or parried was a step toward avenging her father. She refused to hold back or let them treat her like a delicate girl. Word spread through camp that Arya Stark, the missing daughter, had returned and that she was training with steel. Some snickered. Others admired her spirit, calling her the she-wolf. She found a sense of belonging in these drills, forging new camaraderie with men who had fought for her father. She listened to their stories by the fires at night, hearing how they missed the quiet honor of Ned Stark's rule in the north. She felt a pang every time they spoke of her father. She never told them she had taken a life herself, and they never asked. The war progressed. Robb planned an engagement with the Lannister forces near the Whispering Wood. He kept Arya in camp for safety. She paced restlessly while the men marched off, returning days later with news of victory. Jaime Lannister was captured. Arya listened in awe as men recounted the battle with hushed excitement. She was proud of Robb, proud of the North. But she wanted to do more. She wanted to see Sansa freed, to see Joffrey brought low. Her kill list was never far from her mind. Each night, she whispered it like a prayer. Joffrey, Cersei, Island Payne, the Hound, Marantran. Baelish's name no longer haunted the chant. She sometimes wondered if the gods would punish her for enacting vengeance on him. But in her heart, she believed she had done what needed doing. If only it had saved her father. Still, at least one piece of the puzzle was removed, gone forever. As the war churned on, they received ravens bearing news of battles further south, of shifting alliances, of Renly Baratheon's fleeting claim. The realm was in chaos. Arya grew used to the life of a war camp, waking early, training, listening for rumors, eating whatever rations were available. She adapted. She felt older than her years, shaped by the violence she had witnessed. Yet, in the quiet hours, she still found tears slipping down her cheeks when she thought of Ned. She would remember a moment in Winterfell, the way he used to ruffle her hair, that gentle smile on his stern face, and the tears would come unbidden. She never let anyone see. She would slip into the shadows, find a corner of the camp, and let the grief flow for a time, then steel herself again. Robb planned to march further south to press their advantage against the Lannisters and to barter for Sansa's release. Arya was determined to come, refusing to remain behind. This time, Robb allowed it, though he commanded a few loyal men to watch out for her. Arya accepted their presence grudgingly, seeing them as glorified babysitters, but she swallowed her pride in order to remain near her brother. The host set forth. Banners snapped in the wind, the direwolf insignia displayed proudly. Arya rode a small mare, all angles and bone, but she guided it with surprising skill. And so the war road stretched before them. Arya did not know how things would end. She knew only that the capital was far behind her, as was the memory of the corridor where Peter Baelish had breathed his last. She carried that memory within her, a dark seed that had taken root in her spirit. She might never wash the blood from her conscience, but she was determined to become stronger, to honor her father's memory in whatever way she could. She recalled his lessons on honor, on doing what was right, even when it was hard. In some small measure, she felt she was following that path, though she had strayed into violence. She told herself it was not for personal gain, but for justice and survival. And every time she felt the blade in her hand, she remembered Sirio's voice reminding her, fear cuts deeper than swords. She would not let fear control her. She would find a way to help Robb, rescue Sansa, protect her family. And if the time came that she stood face to face with Joffrey or Cersei or the others who had shattered her world, she would make them pay. Amid the chaos of war, with armies clashing, ravens bearing dire tidings, and the unstoppable churn of fate, Arya rode at her brother's side. She was no longer the wide-eyed girl of Winterfell. She had killed for vengeance, had tasted the bitterness of betrayal and death, and though it weighed on her, it had not broken her. She was Arya Stark, wolf-blooded, carrying forward her father's legacy in her own fierce way. And the realm might tremble at what she would become. Arya rode with her brother's army, finding the days and nights merging into a rhythm of marching, drilling, and the harsh realities of war. The battlefield always loomed just ahead, like a dark shape beyond the horizon. Though she had traveled alone and endured so much, she discovered that being surrounded by hundreds of armed men carried its own sort of weight. Soldiers exchanged jokes and boasts near the campfires, but a strain undercut every laugh. Too many had lost kin in battles past, too many believed there were harsher trials yet to come. Arya felt that the entire host was bracing for another storm. She learned to fit into this new life by adopting small routines. In the mornings, she woke early, washing her face at whatever stream or barrel of water was available. Then she joined the men who trained at dawn, though they did not often expect her. Some looked at her askance, a highborn girl with a fierce glare, but they had also seen her quick footwork with a sword. A few gave her honest sparring, not pulling their blows too much. Arya learned to meet them with determination. Each time she was knocked down, she rose with clenched teeth, demanding another round. Robb entrusted her safety to a few who were old hands at war. One was Hal Malin, a loyal retainer from Winterfell days, gruff in speech but gentle enough that he did not bristle at Arya's presence. Another was Joseph, a seasoned archer who had survived more skirmishes than he cared to recount. These men ensured she was never left alone if the army needed to break camp in a hurry or if outriders returned with dire news. Arya found the constant watch a bit stifling, but she understood Robb's fears well enough. She had only just returned to him, and the scars of their father's loss were still raw. As they marched deeper into the Riverlands, the signs of war became impossible to ignore. Farms sat empty, livestock scattered or stolen. Soldiers who scouted ahead returned with grim tidings. Lannister foragers had been spotted burning storehouses, seizing grain, tormenting villages that they suspected might harbor northerners. The sight of blackened fields and half-destroyed cottages twisted Arya's stomach. It felt all too familiar, recalling the rubble she had seen while fleeing King's Landing. Yet it hardened her resolve. She knew why Robb fought. Travel on the open roads was dangerous, even for the Stark host. At times, rumors came that the Mountain, Gregor Clegane, was riding with a brutal band, slaughtering any who refused him tribute or dared to proclaim loyalty to the Starks or Tullis. Arya longed to see that monster pay for his crimes. She recalled him towering over others in the capital. But she was never close to the front lines when the Outriders clashed with Gregor's men. Robb insisted that she remain in the heart of the column or with the baggage train if there was risk of a skirmish. She chafed at the restriction but bit her tongue. The war was bigger than her wishes. She contented herself by continuing to practice whenever she could, slipping away at midday halts to find a partner or a quiet spot to run through forms. She clutched at her focus like a lifeline. Every feint, every thrust was a step away from the powerless girl she had been in the Red Keep. Sometimes Arya overheard men mention Peter Baelish's death with a sort of offhand scorn or relief. Few in the north had liked him, though no one knew he had died at Arya's hand. Robb never spoke of it openly, and Arya appreciated that unspoken understanding between them. Baelish had garnered enemies all over the realm, so no one seemed overly surprised that a blade had found him. Sometimes they speculated that the Lannisters had turned on him. Others shrugged it off as more King's Landing treachery. Arya let them talk. She would look down at her hands, remembering the warm slick of blood. Even now, she felt no regret at having ended the man who betrayed her father, only a lingering sense of grim destiny, as though that act had set her on a path she could never leave. As spring threatened to melt into the swelter of a southern summer, the Stark host crossed the Trident. The muddy waters lapped at the horses' hooves. The crossing took time, with wagons rolling slowly along makeshift pontoon bridges, but the men were disciplined. At every stage, there were watchers on the roads to guard against a surprise Lannister raid. From passing rivermen, they learned that Tywin Lannister's forces were massing somewhere south of Harrenhal. The ghostly castle dominated talk among the troops. The men prayed that Tywin would keep his distance, for Harrenhal was rumored to be cursed, and no one wanted to be the next victim of that cursed seat. Arya remembered how she had skirted Harrenhal with Yoren and the chill she felt even from a distance. She was relieved to hear that Robb had no immediate intention to besiege the fortress, for they had larger concerns, obtaining more allies, securing supply lines, and pressing for Sansa's release. The day that a raven arrived from King's Landing brought excitement and tension. Robb summoned his bannermen to the command tent, and Arya managed to slip in behind them. Tall men in mail and boiled leather filled the tent, their voices hushed. Robb stood at a table where a map lay pinned with small carved pieces. He had the letter in his hand. When the bannermen quieted, he read it aloud, a proposal from Queen Regent Cersei proclaiming that if Robb Stark bent the knee and acknowledged Joffrey as king, Sansa might be given leniency. The letter also demanded the North's submission and a forswearing of any claim to independence. Arya felt fury simmer in her chest as Robb read the words. She saw his jaw tighten, his eyes dark with rage. When he finished, a cacophony broke out. Some northern lords shouted that the Lannisters had no right to hold a Stark hostage. Others demanded vengeance. A few, more cautious, urged that they negotiate to free Sansa, then resume the war at a better time. Robb's gaze flicked to Arya, and she met his eyes across the crowded tent. She saw how the burden weighed on him. Sansa was in enemy hands, and the Lannisters dangled her as bait. Arya balled her fists. Her sister was used like a pawn, just as her father had been. Robb spoke with authority that reminded Arya of their father. "There will be no bending the knee," he said firmly. "The Lannisters executed my father under a banner of false mercy. Their word means nothing. We shall continue our fight." He drew a breath. "But we must also see that Sansa is rescued. We'll press on with the war. If we win enough victories, if we capture enough of their lords, we can arrange a proper exchange. We will not beg for scraps." The bannermen roared approval. Arya felt relief. She did not want to see Robb abandon the cause. Ned Stark's death demanded justice. But she also felt the sting of hopelessness for Sansa. That night, outside the tent, she asked Robb if he truly believed they could save her. He knelt so that his eyes were level with hers, his expression kinder than he allowed himself in front of the men. "I do," he said quietly. "We've captured Jaime Lannister. Once word reaches King's Landing, they'll know we have the Kingslayer in our dungeons. He's worth more to them than anything. We'll demand Sansa's safe release." Arya nodded, heart pounding. She recalled seeing Jaime in King's Landing strutting about in golden armor. Now he was Robb's prisoner, ironically enough. She felt no pity for him. She only hoped that the Lannisters would see reason. But something told her that Joffrey was not the sort of king to trade easily, and Cersei might not yield unless forced. Still, having Jaime gave the North a valuable piece on the board. The next morning, they marched for the twins again, hoping to secure Lord Walder Frey's cooperation on matters of supply and safe passage. Arya remembered all too well the crossing that her family had used when they first traveled south. Then she'd been a bored young girl, complaining of the time spent waiting while her father negotiated with Walder Frey. Now she arrived as a fugitive turned refugee in her own brother's army, carrying a blade at her hip. The place itself seemed unchanged. 2 squat stone keeps on either bank, a large bridge connecting them. The Freys lined the battlements, suspicious as always. Even though Robb was now recognized as the king in the north by many, he still had to bow to Walder Frey's demands in some respects. The old man was canny and unpredictable. Arya found herself disliking Walder Frey on sight. She remembered him from their brief meeting. She stood to one side as Robb and his lords met with Frey's brood in the main hall, forced to listen to Walder's whining about insults, alliances, and the cost of feeding so many men. The discussion was tedious but crucial. Arya scowled at the mention of marriage pacts. She recalled that in the true timeline, Robb had promised to marry one of Frey's daughters. But her father was alive at that point to moderate the discussion. Now everything was more urgent. She listened to Walder demand certain concessions along with various perks for his family. Robb's patience impressed her. He remained diplomatic, promising to reward the Freys if they continued to allow safe crossing for his host and permitted shipments of grain. A hush settled when Walder pressed for a marriage alliance again, an overt attempt to secure the future. Robb glanced at Arya, then back at Walder. "I cannot speak for my sister's future, if that's what you suggest," he said stiffly. "She's too young, and her safety must be guaranteed above all else. The Freys will have their due, but not that." Arya bristled at the idea that Walder might have set his sights on her hand in marriage. The notion was repulsive. She was scarcely old enough, and she wanted no part of any arrangement that would make her a pawn. She was grateful Robb refused. Walder, though annoyed, focused on discussing Edmure Tully's potential match or other arrangements. In the end, a semblance of agreement was reached, leaving Walder half-satisfied that his house would gain advantage. Arya's skin crawled during the entire negotiation, but at least the Freys did not bar their path. They left the twins behind them, continuing their campaign in the Riverlands. In the long march that followed, Arya felt a growing restlessness. She was part of the army, yes, but she was rarely permitted to do more than practice or help with small chores around camp. Soldiers often complained that it was no life for a girl, but she let their remarks wash off her. Deep inside, she yearned for a chance to prove her worth. Part of her still imagined plunging a blade into Joffrey's heart one day, the way she had cut Baelish's throat. She had been robbed of saving her father, but she could still avenge him by helping end the Lannisters' reign. Yet every time she thought that, she recalled how her father would have frowned at the notion of an unprovoked killing. Then again, Joffrey had drawn first blood, had he not? One evening after they'd made camp near a burned village, Arya ventured out among the tents. Many men were asleep, drained from the day's march, but some still lingered by fires, whispering about Tywin Lannister's movements. Arya overheard a rumor that Tywin might have sent emissaries to the Reach, hoping to secure alliances now that Baelish was gone. Apparently Baelish had once brokered important deals with the Tyrells. Arya had no idea if that would matter, but it reminded her of the subtle ways Baelish's death might change the realm. She listened for news of Sansa, but there was little. The capital was sealed up, they said. No ravens came or went without the Lannisters' approval. That left Arya to wonder if her sister was growing more isolated by the day. The night was cool, a hint of autumn coming despite the calendar's insistence it was still summer. Arya shivered in her cloak as she circled back to Robb's command tent. She pushed aside the flap to see him hunched over a map, alone. The lantern light threw shadows across his features, making him look older than his years. He glanced up at her approach. "You should be sleeping," he said softly. "Tomorrow's another hard march." "I couldn't," she admitted, stepping closer. "I was thinking of everything. Sansa. This war. Father." She hesitated. "Do you think we'll actually win? The Lannisters still hold King's Landing. Joffrey's on the throne. The city's crawling with gold cloaks. And from what I hear, Tywin's not defeated." "Not yet." Robb exhaled. "We've won key victories, but it will take more. The Southern Lords might rally to us if they realize Joffrey's cruelty. Or if Stannis Baratheon presses his own claim. The realm is fractured. That could be our advantage, but it could also lead to chaos." He traced a finger along the map, pointing to the area around Harrenhal. "Tywin's forced to split his forces. That gives us a chance to strike in smaller engagements rather than one pitched battle." Arya frowned. She didn't pretend to understand the intricacies of war, but she saw how thinly stretched Robb's men were becoming. "What can I do to help?" she asked. "I hate just waiting day after day." He smiled sadly. "You've helped me by returning," he said. "Knowing you're alive, that I'm not alone in this, it matters. But if you're asking for more, well, you're not a soldier, Arya. You're still a—" "I'm not a child," she interrupted, her voice taut. "I survived King's Landing when they were hunting me. I killed a man, Robb." She swallowed, voice dropping. I know my age, but I'm not helpless." His expression clouded. "I know," he said, placing a warm hand on her shoulder. "You're braver than most grown men. But you're still my sister. I won't put you at the tip of the spear. I can't lose anyone else." His eyes flicked toward the map again. "For now, you stay safe. If there's a task I can give you, I will. But I won't risk your life. Let me shoulder this burden." Arya wanted to argue, but she saw the strain in his eyes. He was already weighed down by so much: the guardianship of the North, the negotiations with allies, the sorrow over their father, and the knowledge that Sansa remained a captive. She forced herself to nod. Before she left the tent, she whispered, "I won't stay helpless forever. If there's something I can do, tell me." He gave the barest nod, gaze distant. The army advanced, forging deeper into contested lands. Arya found small ways to occupy herself. She helped gather kindling for the fires, carried messages if Robb or his captains asked her. She practiced her sword work with any recruit who would spar with her. Over time, a few men grew accustomed to her presence. She learned their names: Daisy Mormont, who hailed from Bear Island, a fierce woman warrior who had joined the host to represent her house. She admired how Daisy carried herself, unashamed to be a woman with a blade. Arya spent hours learning from her, soaking in every lesson. Daisy never coddled her, and Arya was grateful. The nights passed in slow succession until the day the Outriders returned with urgent news. A Lannister band was raiding villages less than a league away, butchering small folk suspected of harboring Stark sympathies. Robb rallied a portion of his cavalry and prepared to ride out to defend them. Arya watched the flurry of preparation from the edge of the camp, half hoping to be included, but of course no summons came for her. Instead, Robb left her behind, giving strict orders for the rest of the army to remain in formation, marching at a measured pace so as not to leave the baggage train vulnerable. He would meet them at a predetermined point after dealing with the raiders. The next day, Arya heard from some men that the raid had been savage. Burned farms, slaughtered peasants. But Robb's cavalry arrived in time to catch the Lannisters unaware. They destroyed the raiders, capturing a few men, but found little comfort in victory when they saw the ruin the Lannisters had wrought. Hearing this, Arya paced the camp, hot anger coiling in her chest. She wanted to do more, to avenge these innocents. She remembered a conversation with her father long ago about how a lord must protect the people, that justice was not only about punishing evil but shielding the weak. Everything she heard confirmed that Joffrey and the Lannisters showed no mercy. Robb rejoined the main host a day later, grim-faced. He held a council with his lords to discuss next steps, concluding they needed to move swiftly to outmaneuver the larger Lannister force rumored to be gathering near Harrenhal. The army would push south, hoping to unite with more Tully forces and perhaps gather new allies. Arya listened to the talk around the fires, gleaning that the war was at a precarious stage. They were winning battles, but Tywin was no fool, and his gold could buy new swords. Despite the constant tension, or perhaps because of it, Arya sharpened her focus. She woke earlier each morning, found a quiet spot by the edge of camp, and moved through the water dancer's steps Syrio had taught her. Sometimes she felt as though Syrio's spirit was there, correcting her posture. She tried to remember the graceful fluidity of the Braavosi style, combining it with the northern ferocity she had learned from the soldiers. She was forging something new, a style that was wholly her own. With each lunge and pivot, she reminded herself that she was no longer that frightened girl. She was a wolf among men, and she would hold her own. It was on a particularly foggy morning that something unusual happened. Arya was halfway through her exercises when she sensed another presence. She turned to see a figure watching from beyond a line of scraggly bushes. Alarmed, she grabbed for the wooden practice sword she had propped nearby, thinking it might be a scout from an enemy band. But a familiar voice spoke up. "Seven hells, you've got quick feet." She lowered the makeshift weapon, hard hammering. It was the Hound standing there in his battered armor, half his face shadowed by the morning gloom. She had heard he was with the Stark army. Now Robb had captured Sandor Clegane after one of the battles, or so the rumor went. Though not as prized a captive as Jaime Lannister, he was still a man of note. Arya had avoided him since she knew him as a monster who served the Lannisters. So why was he here? She glared at him, recalling how he had helped the Lannisters in King's Landing, how he'd been Joffrey's guard. "What do you want?" she snapped. Her voice shook despite her efforts to sound brave. He shrugged. "Went for a piss and a walk. Saw you flitting around like a little bird hopped up on madness. I'd say you look better than the last time I saw you cowering in that throne room." She remembered that day vividly, the day her father had been seized with the hound lurking around the corners. Her anger flared and she spat, "I'm not cowering now." He gave a rough chuckle, his scarred lips twisting. "No, you're not. That's plain to see." His gaze flicked to the wooden sword in her hand, then to her stance. "Where'd you learn that?" She hesitated. "Bravos. From a man named Farrell. He was the first sword of the Sea Lord." She wasn't sure why she volunteered that, but something about the question demanded an answer. The hound had always unnerved her, his fearsome presence and burnt face a reminder of King's Landing's cruelty. But here, he didn't seem eager to harm her. He snorted. "A Bravosi dancing master. Figures. Didn't save your father, did he?" Arya bristled, stepping forward as if to strike him with her wooden sword, but he raised a hand. "Calm down, girl. I'm not your foe, at least not right now. I'm stuck here in your brother's camp unless I want to risk my head. Some gratitude would be nice. I could have turned you in the moment I saw you if I wanted." Arya narrowed her eyes. "Turned me in for WH. At? I'm here with my family." He shrugged. "Maybe the Lannisters put a price on your head, maybe not. Not that it matters now. I'm out of their good graces after I refused to stand by while that boy king you hate so much did his butchery." His voice was rough. "I left, not that they took it kindly." She studied him, uncertain if he was telling the truth. But she remembered hearing some rumor that the hound had abandoned King's Landing at the Battle of the Blackwater in another timeline. Here, the war had played out differently, but perhaps he had deserted all the same. She lowered the practice sword slightly. "Why would you desert them?" He gave a bark of laughter. "Because I got tired of serving a mad whelp who thinks killing is a game. I served the Lannisters because they paid well, and I had no love for my brother, the Mountain. But that doesn't mean I enjoyed watching Joffrey's sadism." His eyes flicked over her again. "Might surprise you, but I've got my lines I won't cross." Arya's thoughts raced. She hated the hound for what he'd done in service to Joffrey. But she also remembered him saving Sansa from brutes more than once. Maybe there was some flicker of decency in him. The knowledge didn't quell her anger entirely. She swallowed. "So now you're a prisoner of my brother. More like a captive who's allowed to keep his sword so long as I behave," he muttered. "Not that I have many choices. I won't go crawling back to the Lannisters. And any man who sees this face might think I'm a demon out of nightmares." Arya wasn't sure what to say. She still distrusted him. Yet he wasn't launching at her or insulting her father. He just stood there, battered by the war. She turned away, returning to her practiced stance. "Then go away," she said, forcing her voice to be steady. "Unless you want to fight me." A low chuckle. "What would you do if I said yes?" She spun, brandishing her wooden sword. "I'd do my best to put you on your back." In truth, she wasn't certain she could best him. He was massive and battle-hardened. But a reckless part of her welcomed the challenge. He snorted, stepping forward. "You've got guts, girl. But that Bravosi prancing won't save you if your opponent's faster or bigger. Sometimes a fight's just about brute force." Without warning, he lunged, swatting at her arm. She darted back, reflexes honed by hours of practice. He tested her with a few more mock blows, clearly not at full speed. Arya twisted away, cursing under her breath. It was the first time they'd ever exchanged blows, even if half-heartedly. She tried a quick thrust at his side, the same kind of move she'd used on Baelish, but the hound anticipated it. He batted her wooden sword aside, hooking his foot behind her ankle. She went down hard, landing on her backside with a jolt. Her wooden sword clattered to the ground. Anger flared. She scrambled up, ignoring the sting in her hip, and lunged for the practice sword. But he placed a boot on it. "Enough," he growled. "If I'd been using real steel, you'd be dead by now." Arya panted, staring up at him. A swirl of frustration and shame coursed through her. She had told herself she was stronger now, that she could handle any threat. But the hound was a different beast entirely, well beyond the skill level of a half-trained girl. She clenched her fists. "You caught me off guard." He removed his foot, letting her retrieve the wooden blade. "You're not bad," he said grudgingly. "I've seen seasoned knights trip over their own feet. But you fight with style, not with cunning. A real fight is ugly. Keep your eyes open." With that, he turned and strode away, disappearing into the misty trees. Arya stood there, every nerve humming. She hated him for humiliating her, but also recognized a brutal lesson in what he'd done. She needed more than water dancing. She needed to prepare for opponents who showed no fairness or grace. She swallowed her pride, staring at the spot where he had vanished. The next time, if there was a next time, she would not be so easily beaten. Time moved on. The Stark host marched, halted, and marched again, weaving through the riverlands to elude Tywin's main force. Scouts said Tywin was trying to corner them, but Robb's cunning and knowledge of the terrain let them stay one step ahead. Tensions within the camp sometimes ran high, men longed to see a decisive victory or to go home. Supplies ran thin. Arya watched her brother wrestle with each hardship. She offered what comfort she could, though there was little a young girl could do. When the scouts returned one day with news that Tywin's men had camped near the ruins of an old holdfast, Robb decided to strike. He convened a war council, laying out a plan to attack by nightfall, using the darkness to mask their approach. Many of the northern lords agreed. It would be a gamble. Tywin outnumbered them, but perhaps they could deal a blow to a portion of his host before reinforcements arrived. The camp bustled with preparation. Arya glimpsed the Hound among the men putting on his armor. She felt a jolt of surprise to see that he was being armed for the battle under watchful eyes, as though Robb trusted his skill more than he feared his betrayal. Maybe Robb was desperate for every strong sword arm. She watched from a distance as men sharpened blades, checked stirrups, and tested bowstrings. The flicker of torches illuminated grim faces. They were all readying for the risk of death. Robb approached her just before he rode out his mount, snorting. She stood among the bustle, her fingers twisting together. "Stay with Hal Malin," he told her firmly. "He's going to guard the camp with some others while we engage the Lannisters. You understand?" Arya nodded, though her gut twisted. "Be safe," she whispered. "I can fight too, you know." His face softened. "I know. And if the camp is attacked, do what you must. But don't seek out trouble. Promise me." She felt the sting of tears but blinked them away, nodding again. "I promise." He reached down from his horse to squeeze her hand, then spurred his mount forward, leading a contingent of knights and foot soldiers out of the camp. A smaller group remained behind to guard the wounded, the supplies, and Arya. She paced anxiously for what felt like hours, hearing distant hoofs thundering away across the fields. The night grew darker, the wind picking up. The glimmer of stars was obscured by clouds. Every snap of a twig made Arya jump. At some point, she sat by the main campfire, arms wrapped around her knees. She whispered the names of those she hated, the names on her kill list, letting it fuel her anger and fear into something steadier. Joffrey, Cersei, Island Pain, Meryn Trant, the Mountain, the Hound. But the Hound's name gave her pause now. She had begun to sense that he was not quite the mindless killer she imagined. Still, she included him out of old habit, her vow to avenge the wrongs against her family. Baelish's name was silent, for that wound was already avenged. Sometimes she wondered if she should add Tywin Lannister to the chant. She thought so, though she had never seen him up close, had never locked eyes with him. But he was the puppet master behind the war that had taken her father's life. Perhaps if the chance came, she would kill him too. She dozed fitfully, half listening for the sounds of a returning army or an attack. Near dawn, she jolted awake when riders galloped into camp. Lanterns were lit, men stumbled from their tents. Arya saw the shapes of wounded soldiers slumped in their saddles, and her heart lurched. The battle had taken its toll. She strained her eyes, searching for Robb among them. At last, she saw him ride in, his armor dented and smeared with mud, but he was upright. She released a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. The camp became a flurry of activity, tending to the wounded, collecting the dead. Arya rushed forward, ignoring the protests of guards. She found Robb dismounting near a cluster of men. Blood streaked his face from a shallow cut on his temple, and his expression was grim. She stepped forward, voice trembling. "Robb, are you?" He nodded, cutting her off. "I'm fine. It's mostly a scratch." But his voice shook with fatigue. "We clashed with a portion of Tywin's army. We did damage, but we lost men. The Lannisters retreated before we could press the advantage." He looked at her, eyes distant. "It's war, Arya. A damned bloody business." She didn't know what to say, so she just took his arm gently, helping him walk toward his tent. Hal Malin gave them space. Once inside, Robb slumped onto a camp stool. Arya fetched a cloth, dabbing at the blood on his face. He hissed in pain but let her clean the wound. Neither spoke for a moment. Finally, she found her voice. "I was worried you wouldn't come back." He let out a soft breath. "I have to come back," he said, trying for a smile. "I need to keep the North united. I need to rescue Sansa. And I have to protect you." She lowered her gaze. "I should be the one protecting you too. We're family." His expression gentled. He raised a hand to pat hers. "You do," he said. "Just by being here, you remind me of home." Then he exhaled. "I'm sorry. I'm too tired to speak sense. Let me rest a while. We'll talk in the morning." She nodded, leaving him in the care of Maester Medric, who had joined their host from Riverrun. Outside, the sky was turning gray with the first hint of sunrise, and the camp crackled with subdued anxiety. Too many wounded men. Too many empty bedrolls that would never again be filled. Arya thought of the Lannisters and felt that icy coil of hatred. If she could have ended the war by sneaking into their camp in the dark and cutting throats, she just might have tried. In the days that followed, the Stark host took time to recover from the skirmish. They moved slowly through more neutral territory, trying to avoid direct confrontation with Tywin's main army. Arya noticed that the wounded weighed heavily on Robb's mind. He worried about morale, about supplies. Word reached them that more Lannister detachments were harassing northern supply lines, further complicating matters. Each day brought fresh challenges. One morning, Arya saw the Hound again. He stood by a supply wagon, speaking low to one of the quartermasters. He seemed even more scarred than before, a new scratch across his forearm, but otherwise intact. She paused, torn between hatred and curiosity. Then she approached, arms crossed. He noticed her and gave a grunt. "Come to poke me with that wooden stick again?" She ignored the jab. "I heard you fought in the raid." He shrugged. "Your brother let me hack at some Lannisters. Didn't mind doing that. Tywin's men can all rot in the Seven Hells for all I care." She didn't know if he expected her to sneer at him. Instead, she said, "Why do you hate them so much? You served them for years." He gazed at her through the corner of his eye. The burn scars on his face looked raw in the daylight. "I served them because it was better than starving in Flea Bottom or living under my brother's shadow. Don't mistake that for loyalty. The Lannisters fed me, clothed me, gave me coin. Then I saw what that boy king was truly like. And I decided I'd had enough." He looked away. "You wouldn't understand unless you'd seen what I've seen." Arya thought about the horrific spectacle Joffrey made of her father's execution, the way he tormented Sansa, the sadistic grin on his face. She felt a bitter taste in her mouth. "Maybe I would," she said in a low voice. "He's on my list." The Hound's gaze shot back to her. "List?" She realized she had said too much, but the words were already out. She didn't bother denying it. "Yes. A list of the people I want to kill." He barked a harsh laugh. "A slip of a girl with a kill list. You're not normal, are you?" She stared at him coldly. "Neither are you." They stood there, silent, measuring each other. Then he scoffed as though dismissing her. "You want to kill your enemies? Good luck. But mind you, a real kill is never pretty. Keep that in your head, lest you end up bleeding on the ground." She bristled. "I've killed before," she said, then turned and walked away, leaving him to wonder at the truth of her words. She did not care if he believed her or not. She needed no validation from a dog of the Lannisters, no matter how estranged he might be. In time, the Stark host reached Riverrun, the seat of House Tully. The sight of the ancient castle, with its red sandstone walls and water gates, stirred something in Arya. She remembered visiting as a little girl, chasing cats through the corridors while her mother spoke with her uncle Edmure Tully. Now she returned under the direwolf banner, her father gone, her sister held captive, and half the realm in flames. The fortress itself welcomed them, though the atmosphere was somber. Edmure tried to greet Robb with warmth, but the weight of war overshadowed any family reunion. Arya watched from the sidelines as they embraced, longing for simpler days. It was at Riverrun that the news arrived. Renly Baratheon had been killed in his camp under mysterious circumstances. Rumors spoke of shadows and sorcery, of betrayal from within. Others simply said Stannis Baratheon was the culprit, removing a rival to the Iron Throne. Whatever the truth, the realm was more fractured than ever. Some of Renly's bannermen might join Stannis, while others would rally to the Lannisters to oppose him. That could shift the balance of power in King's Landing. The Lords of the North speculated about how it might affect the war. Arya listened to it all with a mixture of confusion and frustration. She wanted Sansa free and the Lannisters brought low, but the rest of the realm was swirling with chaos. Robb held a war council with his bannermen and the Tully lords. Edmure insisted they should strike at Harrenhal to dislodge the Lannister foothold in the Riverlands. Others argued they should focus on capturing more Lannister nobles for leverage. Robb considered all the input with a weary expression. Arya, allowed to hover at the back of the council only because she refused to leave, noticed how her brother had matured. He no longer looked like the boy who used to spar with her in Winterfell's courtyard. He was sharper, more guarded. She pitied him for bearing so heavy a crown. That night, Arya snuck onto a walkway along Riverrun's walls, gazing down at the moonlit river. She thought of how her mother might once have stood here, or her father, or even Sansa in happier times. The water flowed past, untroubled by the realm's turmoil. She closed her eyes and silently prayed for strength. She asked the old gods, the new gods, any gods who would listen to help her find a way to free Sansa and avenge her father. She wondered if the gods listened to murderers, to children who had spilled blood in a corridor. But she prayed anyway. She felt a presence behind her and turned to see a tall figure in a hooded cloak. For a heartbeat, She tensed, thinking it might be an assassin. But then the cloak shifted to reveal Grey Wind, Robb's direwolf, padding at the man's side. She recognized the man as Roose Bolton, one of Robb's bannermen, pale of complexion and quiet in voice. Arya had seen him at the councils, always speaking in a calm, almost eerie manner. He inclined his head toward her, though no warmth lit his eyes. She greeted him stiffly, then turned back to the water. Bolton paused a few paces away, running a hand along Grey Wind's fur absently, which was surprising. Grey Wind often didn't let others near him. "Lady Arya," Bolton said softly, using her formal address. "The night air is chill. Are you not cold?" She shrugged. "I like the quiet." He nodded, glancing over the battlements. "We all need quiet. In times like these, war can be draining even on the victors. You've seen much for one so young." Arya said nothing. She distrusted Bolton without fully knowing why. Something about his voice or the way his eyes seemed to look right through people unsettled her. She offered a curt nod, stepping back a little. Grey Wind chuffed but remained calm. Bolton studied her. "I have heard rumors that you escaped King's Landing on your own. Remarkable. Most children would have perished. You must have had a guardian angel." Arya's pulse quickened at the reminder. She lowered her gaze. "I had help from a friend." She thought of Sirio, of Yoren, and all those who had died or sacrificed themselves. She considered Baelish's shocked face at the end. "And from the gods," she added quietly. Bolton smiled thinly. "The gods do not often meddle so directly. I'd wager it was your own will that carried you through. A stark will, if you'll pardon the pun." Arya frowned, not liking how he said it. He turned to leave. "Enjoy your quiet, my lady." He nodded, then vanished down the walkway, Grey Wind following after a moment. Arya realized that if the direwolf was comfortable around Bolton, it must mean Robb trusted him, or at least believed him loyal to their cause. Still, her unease lingered like a chill in her bones. She decided not to stay on the wall much longer. The next day, Robb informed Arya that he planned to ride out again, leaving a token force at Riverrun while he pressed deeper into the Riverlands to disrupt Tywin's lines. He wanted to keep Tywin off balance, uncertain where the Stark host might strike. Edmure would remain to defend Riverrun. Arya was to stay in the castle where it was safer. He tried to present it as a kindness, the comfort of a secure fortress rather than the hardships of the campaign trail. Arya scowled, crossing her arms. "You just want me out of your way." Robb sighed. "I want you alive. This next move might be even riskier. We'll be harrying the edges of Tywin's territory. If he calls our bluff, or if we get caught between two forces, it could be a bloodbath." Arya stamped her foot. "I can fight. I can scout. I hate waiting around feeling useless." He put his hands on her shoulders. "You're not useless. You're precious to me, Arya. I've lost too many already. If you were to fall into Lannister hands, or worse, please try to see reason." She glared at him but saw the guilt lurking in his eyes. Reluctantly, she relented, though her entire being burned with frustration. "Fine," she ground out, turning away so he wouldn't see the tears threatening to form. "Go, then. Win the war without me." Robb's voice was gentle. "I'm sorry." Then he left. Arya marched off in a fury, trying not to show how deeply it hurt. She knew he wasn't rejecting her, but she had grown so weary of being left behind. At least in the camp, she'd had some sense of purpose, training with the men, occasionally carrying messages. Now she would be stuck in a castle, well-guarded but powerless. The day Robb departed, a swirl of banners and steel filled the courtyard. Horses nickered, men shouted as they secured gear, and lords donned helmets. Arya stood on a balcony above, watching with arms wrapped tight around herself. She spotted Bolton among them, silent and inscrutable. She saw the Hound as well, apparently allowed to ride with Robb's forces under close watch. And at the head of the procession, Robb sat astride his warhorse, looking every inch the king in the north. He cast one last glance up to her, raising his hand. She couldn't read his expression. Then he led them out the gates. Hours later, the castle felt hollow. Arya wandered the halls, ignoring the well-meaning greetings from Tully guards who recognized her as their lady's daughter. She ended up in the courtyard where a small group of castlemen were practicing archery. She asked if she could join, her tone brooking in. "Oh, argument." They shrugged, handing her a bow sized for a smaller figure. She tested the draw, found it manageable, and began loosing arrows at a target. Her aim was inconsistent at first, but she found a grim satisfaction in the act. Each arrow soared through the air, hitting or missing but letting her vent some of the tumult inside. She thought of Sansa alone in King's Landing. She thought of Baelish dead by her hand and whether or not that had changed the Lannisters' plans. She worried about Robb riding into danger. Each arrow was a prayer or a curse or both. After a time, her arms tired and she lowered the bow, feeling sweat trickle down her back. One of the older guards gave her a nod. "Not bad, my lady. You've got the eye for it, though your stance is a bit wide." She mumbled thanks, handing back the bow. It was better than idling in a tower, at least. The next day, she tried sparring with one of the Tully Knights using wooden blades. He was hesitant at first, but she insisted, and though he easily bested her, she gleaned a few tips about footwork against a heavier sword. In the idle hours, she roamed Riverrun's library, reading old tomes on the history of the Riverlands or scanning musty scrolls about bravos. She was searching for any clue about the fighting styles she'd seen, any edge she might gain. If they were going to keep her locked away, she'd use the time to sharpen her mind and body. Messages arrived sporadically from Robb, detailing small victories or near encounters with Lannister scouts. Arya devoured each letter, clinging to every word. She longed to be out there. Still, she was forced to wait. Days bled into weeks. She tried to imagine Sansa's life in King's Landing if she was forced to attend court to endure Joffrey's cruelty. Maybe Cersei flaunted her power, or maybe she was half-mad with paranoia now that war had consumed the realm. Arya took some grim comfort in knowing that Baelish's scheming wasn't part of it anymore, though doubtless there were plenty of other vipers in the capital. One late afternoon, as she was pacing the ramparts, she noticed a commotion in the courtyard below. A small party of riders had arrived, bearing the sigil of House Stark on their banners. She hurried down, heart-pounding, hoping for news. At the gates, the riders dismounted. One of them was a young man named Burren who had left Riverrun weeks prior to carry messages to Robb. Arya approached him, breath short. "What is it? What news?" He looked haggard, dust clinging to his cloak. "News from the king, my lady," he said, glancing around for a superior. But Arya insisted he speak to her. She led him aside. He lowered his voice. The king and his forces engaged in a surprise attack near the Red Fork. They won a sharp victory, capturing a number of Lannisters. But Lord Bolton was wounded. They say he might not survive. Arya felt a jolt. She did not like Roose Bolton, but a serious wound for a key bannerman was grave news. "And my brother?" she asked. "Is Robb all right?" Burren nodded. "He's uninjured, by the gods' grace. But he's had to move quickly. He sent me on ahead with a message that he'll be marching back here to Riverrun with prisoners. He wants the castle prepared." Arya wondered who those prisoners might be. More Lannister knights, or possibly a noble or two. Her mind raced with possibilities, fresh leverage to exchange for Sansa, or even peace terms. Though she doubted Joffrey would accept negotiations easily. She ushered Burren inside to meet with Edmure, who was effectively in charge, and the castle stirred with fresh purpose. Rooms would be readied for captives, more guards posted, and a place set aside for the wounded. Arya found herself anxious and relieved in equal measure. Robb was returning, and he had triumphed again. But how many times could he push the Lannisters back before fortune turned? Within days, the Outriders announced Robb's approach. A column of men rode up to Riverrun's gates, wagons of wounded trailing, along with a small cluster of knights in chains. Arya hurried to the courtyard. The mood was somber, as though even victory tasted bitter. She spotted Robb near the front, gray wind loping at his side. His face was drawn, with new lines of worry etched there. Edmure descended from the steps to greet him, calling for the gates to be opened wide. Arya pushed through the gathered lords and soldiers. Robb dismounted, handing his reins to a stable boy, and turned to see her. She froze, relief and concern warring inside her. He looked exhausted but unhurt. He gave a small smile at her presence, though it quickly faded. "We lost too many good men," he said quietly. "Though we gained some prisoners. Let's hope they're worth the cost." She glanced at the line of captives, none of whom she recognized immediately. Each wore a heavy expression, some wounded, some scowling in defiance. She saw no sign of Tywin or anyone of his rank, just lesser lords and knights who had followed him. She felt a pang of disappointment, but perhaps they could still be ransomed. Robb passed her, heading for the great hall with Edmure. Arya followed, overshadowed by tall knights and Tully men. Inside, the captives were lined up to state their names and houses. Robb took his seat at the dais, looking every inch the war-weary king, while Edmure stood beside him. Servants scurried with water and bandages for the wounded. Arya slipped in behind Robb's chair. She was determined to watch. One by one, the prisoners announced themselves: Lannister bannermen, hedge knights, minor lords of the Westerlands. Robb questioned them calmly, asking about their numbers, their supply lines, their lord's plans. Most answered with curt responses or vague defiance. A few were wise enough to show submission, hoping for mercy. The hall echoed with the shuffle of armor and the murmurs of soldiers. Arya studied the prisoners' faces, searching for any flicker of remorse or fear. Most avoided meeting her gaze. At last, the final prisoner stepped forward, a lean man with a lined face and a sardonic twist to his lips. His armor was battered and he wore no helmet. His hair was shot through with gray. He gave a mocking bow, iron shackles rattling. "Ser Emon Cray," he said, "formerly in service to Lord Tywin Lannister, though I doubt he cares overmuch for me." Robb's voice was measured. "You fought against my men at the Red Fork?" Cray shrugged. "I did what I was told, as so many do in war. I've no illusions about how this ends. If you want to kill me, get on with it." Edmure scowled. "You'll speak with respect to the king in the north." Cray offered another mocking bow. "Your pardon, my lord. Your grace. Or do I call you the young wolf?" Hard to keep track of all the titles these days. Arya felt a surge of anger. Even in chains, these men showed arrogance. She balled her fists. Robb glanced at her briefly, then addressed Cray again. "You'll be held until ransomed like the rest. But if I hear that you or any of your fellows incite mutiny among my men, I'll have your heads. Am I clear?" Cray grinned humorlessly. "Crystal, your grace." He was led away by guards along with the other prisoners. The tension in the hall remained thick. Arya sensed that no one was entirely satisfied. They had inflicted a defeat on Tywin's men, but they hadn't landed a decisive blow. Tywin himself remained at large, orchestrating the war from safer ground. Robb dismissed most of the assembled men. Only a handful of lords and Arya remained, along with a few guards at the doors. Edmure turned to Robb. "You'll want to rest, nephew. We've prepared the solar for you." Robb shook his head. "I need to see to the wounded first. Then we'll plan our next move." Edmure placed a hand on Robb's arm. "You're working yourself to the bone. At least allow me to send a maester to check that cut on your leg." Arya started. She hadn't known he'd been wounded in the leg. Robb scowled, as if annoyed that Edmure revealed this. "It's just a scratch," he said, but he didn't protest further. As they left the hall, Arya followed, worried. She took Robb's hand once they were beyond earshot, her voice low. "Are you truly all right?" He exhaled. "Truly? I'm tired, Arya. We keep fighting, but Tywin keeps slipping away. Meanwhile, the realm fractures further. We heard rumors that Stannis has laid siege to King's Landing. If the city falls, who knows what might happen to Sansa? Or if the Tyrells might intervene." He squeezed her hand. "But enough. You don't need to carry my burdens." She shook her head. "I want to. You're not alone." He gave a small nod and they continued to the maester's quarters, where Robb's leg was cleaned and bandaged. That evening, the great hall was quieter. Arya lingered at a side table, picking at bread and stew. She saw that the newly arrived captives had been placed under guard in a separate wing of the castle. The tension among the Tully men suggested that one or two of the prisoners were known for cruelty, especially toward small folk. Arya hoped they'd receive no leniency if the rumors were true. After the meal, Robb and several lords gathered to speak of next steps. Arya stood back, trying not to draw attention. Bolton was absent, still recovering from his wounds. The Hound was somewhere in the courtyard, presumably under watch. She heard talk of possibly sending envoys to treat with Stannis if he took King's Landing. Another voice questioned whether they might treat with Renly's widow, Marjorie Tyrell, though she was rumored to be forging new alliances. The realm was in flux, every piece shifting. The only constant was that the Lannisters wouldn't yield. A few days later, the maester declared that Bolton might pull through, though the healing would take time. Arya was relieved in a strange way. While she did not like the man, she did not wish him dead if he was loyal to Robb. The war needed every sword. The days that followed were filled with the routine of a garrisoned castle. Drilling men, repairing armor, distributing rations. Arya took part where she could. She practiced with whomever was willing, improving steadily. A quiet but fierce determination burned in her. She would be ready when the next chance came to strike at their enemies. It was then that a raven arrived from the neck. Arya overheard snatches of conversation among the guards. Apparently, there were sightings of Ironborn raiders along the coasts, attacking the north while Robb was away. Arya felt a surge of alarm. Her brothers Bran and Rickon were in Winterfell, along with her mother if she had returned there. She didn't know if this was true or rumor, but the thought of the Ironborn seizing anything in the north made her blood run cold. Robb faced this new crisis with a taut expression. Edmure offered what help he could, but the Riverlands were also threatened by lingering Lannister loyalists. For the first time, Arya saw real doubt in her brother's eyes. They were fighting a war on too many fronts. The Lannisters to the south, the Ironborn to the west, and now internal strife that might require him to pull men back north. She watched him pace in his solar, reading messages. "Damn Balon Greyjoy," he muttered. "He's chosen the perfect time to strike. They always do." Arya frowned. "What will you do?" He stared at a map laid out on a table. "I need to send men north to repel the Ironborn. But if I weaken my forces here, Tywin might push back. Or if King's Landing stands, Joffrey may try to reclaim the Riverlands. And then there's Sansa." He trailed off, anguish in his voice. Arya's heart clenched. There was no easy solution. She wished she had an answer. "You'll figure it out," she said, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You're our king, Robb. Father's blood. You have to." He let out a shaky breath. "Father's blood," he repeated softly, "but no father's guidance." The words hung in the air, a reminder of the gaping hole Ned Stark had left behind. As it turned out, necessity forced Robb's hand. More ravens confirmed that Winterfell itself was threatened. He would have to split his forces, sending a portion north under a trusted commander. Roose Bolton volunteered to lead them as soon as he was well enough. Some of the other northern lords agreed to ride with him, outraged that their home territories were under threat. Robb would remain in the Riverlands with a core host to keep pressure on the Lannisters and possibly negotiate with Stannis if King's Landing fell to him. Arya listened to these plans, wishing she could volunteer to go north. But she knew that was impossible. Her place was with Robb. He would never let her ride off. She recognized, too, that if she returned to Winterfell and the war turned, she could end up a prisoner all over again. In the midst of these arrangements, a new rumor arrived. King's Landing was under fierce assault by Stannis' fleet, but wildfire had been unleashed in the bay, wreaking havoc. The city might still stand. Joffrey and Cersei held on, though battered. Arya's stomach churned at the idea of Sansa caught in the middle of that. How many more horrors must her sister see? She prayed Sansa stayed safe. At least Baelish was gone. Arya could only imagine what new schemes he would have hatched in such chaos. But with or without him, King's Landing was a pit of vipers. As the war raged on multiple fronts, Arya's hatred for the Lannisters simmered, and she practiced daily to keep her mind from spiraling. She sparred with Tully knights, took to the archery butts again, even listened in on any soldier who would share tales of battle tactics. She wanted knowledge. She devoured everything she could, feeling an urgency in her soul. If another chance arose to free her sister or strike a blow against the Lannisters, she would seize it, and this time she would be strong enough to act without relying on desperate luck. Late one evening, while the castle slept, Arya lay awake in her bedchamber. Her window overlooked the moonlit waters around Riverrun's walls. She found herself replaying the memory of Baelish's final moments yet again, his shock, the wet gurgle of blood, the weight of what she had done. She hadn't spoken of that memory with Robb in a long time. She wondered if it weighed on him as well. He had never condemned her. Yet she sometimes wondered if he feared what it meant that his little sister had killed a man. She turned on her side, shutting her eyes, trying to banish the memory. Baelish had deserved it. But the finality of taking a life lingered in her heart. In her dreams, she saw King's Landing in flames, the streets choked with smoke. She ran through winding alleys, searching for Sansa, ignoring the screams of people. She found Baelish's corpse around every corner, throat-slit eyes staring blankly. Then the Hound appeared, looming out of the haze, mocking her. She awoke in a cold sweat before dawn, breathing hard, her fingernails digging into her palms so deeply they left marks. The next morning brought a jolt of excitement and fear. A raven from the north reported that while some Ironborn had raided along the coast, Winterfell was still held by the Starks. Robb was overjoyed at the news that his brothers remained safe. But the threat was not gone. Bolton's men would still head north to secure the region. Plans were made in haste, and by midday wagons were loaded with weapons and supplies for the journey north. Arya watched the flurry of activity from a balcony, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Part of her wanted to be among those riding home, but another part knew this war was not finished in the south. That afternoon, Robb found her in the courtyard, adjusting the straps on her boots as she prepared for her usual practice. He leaned against a post, face solemn. I have something to tell you, he said quietly. She straightened, heart picking up speed. What is it? He glanced around to ensure no one else was close enough to overhear. I've sent a small party of men on a secret mission. I didn't announce it in council because I don't know which ears might be listening. They're going to try to make contact with someone in King's Landing, someone who might help smuggle Sansa out. Arya's eyes widened. How? Who would help us? He shook his head. I can't share many details, not even with you. But I have to try. I can't let Sansa remain a hostage if there's a chance to free her without a full-scale siege of the city. The men I sent are skilled at infiltration. They might fail or be captured, but I had to make the attempt. I wanted you to know. Emotion welled up in Arya's chest. She threw her arms around Robb, and he stiffened slightly, then relaxed, hugging her back. Thank you, she whispered. You're doing what father would have done, trying to save her. He gave a weary smile. I hope so. Just pray the gods smile on our efforts. Then he left to review the day's errands, leaving Arya hopeful for the first time in weeks. Perhaps there was a chance Sansa could be rescued after all. Tom crawled as Arya waited for news. The infiltration party would take weeks to even reach King's Landing if they managed to avoid Lannister patrols. Meanwhile, the war ground on. More skirmishes flared in the Riverlands and Robb's forces had to respond. Arya remained behind whenever Robb rode out. She hated that part, but she forced herself to accept it. She had no desire to make his burdens heavier by disobeying. At times, she glimpsed the Hound in the courtyards or corridors, always accompanied by guards if he was armed. He had proven himself in battle under Robb's command, apparently. Some men spoke grudgingly of his skill and fearlessness. Arya still felt wary of him, but she caught him watching her from a distance now and then, as if curious or perhaps amused at her presence. She kept her distance unless forced to cross paths. Eventually, word came that Bolton's forces had marched north, freeing Riverrun of some of its crowding. Another fraction of the men rode east to secure roads from Lannister marauders. The castle quieted. Days turned to weeks. Edmure tried to keep spirits up, hosting small feasts or archery contests, but the air was thick with uncertainty. Ravaged farmland, displaced peasants, families separated by war, it was enough to make anyone's heart heavy. Arya spent her days drilling, reading about battle histories, eavesdropping on war councils, or assisting the maester with small tasks. She tended to a few wounded men, learning basic bandaging. On a whim, she found a half-wild cat lurking in the castle's stable yard and tried to befriend it, remembering how she used to chase cats in the Red Keep. The cat eyed her with suspicion, but over time it grew less fearful, letting her pet it briefly. It reminded her that small kindnesses still existed in the world, even amid chaos. She also tried her hand at riding more frequently, practicing speed and agility. She recalled how Syrio had said a true water dancer must move like water in all things, not just on foot. She had no illusions about being a mounted knight, but she wanted every advantage she could gain. The stable Aster was amused by her determination, occasionally offering tips. Slowly, she learned to guide her mare with a surer hand. At night, the dread of waiting would return. She would stare at the ceiling of her chamber, imagining the infiltration party sneaking into King's Landing. Where would they go? Perhaps through the sewers or disguised as merchants. Maybe if the gods were kind, they'd spirit Sansa away. Arya pictured a tearful reunion here in Riverrun, Sansa hugging her close, apologizing for all the silly quarrels they'd had. She prayed for that day. She prayed it wouldn't be overshadowed by more tragedy. Then, late one afternoon, as Arya was combing the library shelves in search of an old treatise on bravos, she heard shouting in the courtyard. She hurried out to see that a messenger had arrived on a lathered horse, demanding to speak with the king in the north. Men rushed about and the tension soared. Arya's heart thumped. Robb was in the war room with Edmure. She slipped inside behind the messenger, ignoring the guard who tried to bar her way. The man looked half dead from exhaustion, sweat streaming down his face. Robb ordered him to speak. Between gasps, the messenger relayed that there had been a confrontation with Tywin's main army near a place called Oxgross. The Stark Outriders had launched a daring raid at night, scoring a victory. Tywin was forced to retreat, at least for now. Cheers erupted from some of the lords gathered. Robb nodded, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. But the messenger continued, voice shaking. Tywin had left a swath of destruction in his wake, apparently furious at being outmaneuvered. Villages were burned, peasants slaughtered. The outriders who pursued them spoke of horrors. Arya felt her stomach churn, recalling how these same tactics had plagued the Riverlands for months. A victory for the Stark host, but the small folk paid the price. Robb's face hardened. We'll keep pressing him. He can't hide forever. Then, as if reading Arya's mind, he said, "We'll find a way to stop this cruelty. One victory at a time." She nodded, though she wondered how many innocents would die before that happened. Amid the talk of Oxcross, another messenger arrived with a raven scroll. Robb read it with a twinge of anticipation, scanning the lines quickly. Arya saw his face tense. "This is from our men near King's Landing," he said. The war room quieted. Arya's heart jumped. They haven't reached Sansa yet, but they're close to making contact with someone inside the Red Keep. They advised patience. Relief and fear warred in Arya. At least they weren't captured or dead. But so many things could go wrong in that snake pit. Still, it was a spark of hope. She forced herself to remain calm. Robb glanced at her, something like encouragement in his eyes. He was reminding her silently that their plan was in motion. That night, she paced her chamber, willing the infiltration party to succeed. She half expected to dream of Baelish's lifeless eyes, but for once, her dreams were emptier, as if her mind couldn't conjure more horrors. The next week brought fresh challenges. Tywin, though retreating, was by no means beaten. Word came that he might seek to join forces with other Lannister loyalists, or even pivot to confront Stannis if King's Landing was in peril. The realm was in constant motion, alliances forming and dissolving. Arya learned to endure the uncertainty, clinging to her daily routines. She sparred, she rode, and she waited for more messages. Then, one moonless night, an alarm rang through Riverrun. Arya jolted awake to the clang of bells. She scrambled for her boots and hurried outside. The courtyard was alive with torchlight. Soldiers rushed to the walls, weapons drawn. Arya's mind raced. Were the Lannisters attacking? Could Tywin have slipped past their scouts to strike Riverrun directly? She found Edmure on the ramparts, glaring into the darkness. Robb stood beside him, wearing a hastily donned breastplate, sword at his hip. They stared out at the torches of some force on the far bank of the river. Archers stood ready. Arya approached, heart thudding. Robb spotted her and put out a hand to keep her back. She stood on tiptoe, trying to see. On the opposite side, shapes moved. Then a voice boomed from the dark. "We come bearing a flag of truce. We would speak with the king in the north." The accent was clearly Westerosi, but not one Arya recognized. Robb signaled the archers to hold. After a moment, a single rider advanced across the shallow ford, carrying a white banner. Torchlight revealed a man in plain mail, face shadowed. He halted out of arrow range, calling out again, "We mean no harm. Let us speak, or if you wish, send an envoy." Robb leaned toward Edmure, conferring briefly. Then he gestured for the gates to open slightly. A few knights rode out to meet the man with caution. Arya watched from the wall, straining her ears. They spoke in low tones. After a few minutes, the group rode back inside, bringing the stranger. He was ordered to dismount. Guards seized his weapon. The man lifted his hands in surrender, accompanied by a few companions who entered behind him, also disarmed. Robb and Edmure moved down to the courtyard to meet them. Arya slipped along at a distance, half hidden behind the press of armed men. The strangers appeared dusty and travel-worn, but not bearing Lannister sigils. Instead, they wore the badge of House Florent, a lesser banner of the Tyrells once sworn to Renly but rumored to have shifted allegiances. Arya's mind whirled. Could this be an envoy from the Reach? Robb's voice carried. "You come unannounced in the night. Explain yourselves." The man at the front bowed stiffly. "My lord, your grace, rather. I am Ser Donnell Florent. My companions and I have come with an offer. The Tyrells are reconsidering their alliances. Renly Baratheon is dead, Stannis is fighting a desperate battle for the throne, and King's Landing may fall into chaos. My lord Mace Tyrell contemplates a future in which the Lannisters are no longer suitable allies." A ripple went through the onlookers. Edmure frowned. "You're saying the Tyrells wish to ally with the Starks now? After fighting on the Lannisters' side?" Florent bowed again. "They've not formally joined the Lannisters, my lord. They remained neutral after Renly's death for the most part, though some smaller forces aided in defending King's Landing. With the city in danger, Lord Tyrell re-examines his position. He would discuss terms with the king in the north. There may be a path to mutual benefit." Robb studied Ser Donnell intently. "Why should we trust you? For all I know, this is a ploy by Tywin Lannister to lure us out." Florent shook his head. "With respect, we came in good faith, risking our lives. We traveled by night to avoid Lannister patrols. I beg you grant us an audience, then decide if we're worth trusting." Robb paused, exchanging a look with Edmure. Then he nodded curtly. "You'll stay in the outer keep under guard. At first light, we'll speak. If this is a ruse, you will regret it." He motioned to the guards who led the newcomers away. Arya felt a spark of excitement. If the Tyrells abandoned the Lannisters and sided with the North, it could tilt the war dramatically. The Tyrells controlled vast armies and bountiful harvests. Perhaps, too, they would have sway in King's Landing, where Sansa was captive. She glanced at Robb, who rubbed his brow in weariness. Another complication in an already tangled game, but maybe a promising one. At dawn, Robb convened a meeting with Ser Donnell Florent and his associates in Riverrun's Great Hall. Arya once again found a vantage point along the wall, refusing to be barred. The Tyrell envoys argued that since Renly's demise, the Tyrells were weighing their best moves. They might have thrown in with Stannis, but rumor claimed Stannis was battered by fierce fighting. The Lannisters, meanwhile, were losing hold in the south, Tywin forced to spread his forces thin. The Tyrell host had the potential to march on King's Landing and decide the outcome of the throne. But they wanted security, recognition of their influence, and perhaps the North's pledge not to contest any Tyrell claims in the Reach or the Stormlands. Robb listened carefully, his bannermen debating the potential alliance. Some distrusted the Tyrells, calling them fickle. Others saw a chance to break the Lannisters' power once and for all. Edmure wanted firm guarantees. Ser Donnell claimed to speak for Lord Mace Tyrell, who was apparently open to forging a pact. The Tyrells would mobilize against the Lannisters in exchange for certain titles and lands and an assurance that the North recognized King Renly's marriage, whatever that meant for Lady Margaery's status. It was a complicated negotiation full of half-promises and courtesies laced with threat. Arya's thoughts drifted to Sansa. If the Tyrells marched on King's Landing, it might lead to Sansa's liberation or put her in even more danger if the city erupted in violence. She bit her lip, anxious. Robb's face remained impassive, the face of a king trying to weigh advantage. He did not make a final decision that day. He told Ser Donnell to wait while he conferred with his advisors. Tension simmered. Some predicted that an alliance with the Tyrells would be a turning point in the war. That night, Riverrun buzzed with speculation. Men drank in the halls, toasting the possibility of Tyrell support. Others muttered cynically, suspecting a trick. Arya wandered through the corridors, lost in her own concerns. She found herself near the courtyard, drawn by torchlight and the hum of voices. There, she saw the Hound, his back to her, speaking with a soldier who wore Stark livery. She paused, listening. "Telling you the Tyrells are no better than the Lannisters," the soldier was saying. "They'll do whatever it takes to keep power. My father fought in the rebellion years ago," said they bend with the wind. The Hound grunted. "All High Lords are the same, boy. They kill when it benefits them, they smile when they need your sword. Don't matter which sigil they wear." Arya felt a flicker of bitter agreement. She knew how lords and ladies could betray with a sweet word. Baelish had been a master of that. She turned to leave when her boot scraped against a loose stone. The Hound spun, eyes narrowing. "Who's there?" She stepped into the light. "Only me." The soldier gave her a hasty bow and hurried off, leaving her alone with the Hound. She could see the torchlight glinting on his scar. "If you think all lords are the same, why do you still fight for Robb?" He gave a derisive snort. "Because I've got nowhere else to go. No interest in starving or being hunted as a deserter. Your brother's a fair enough leader. He doesn't relish cruelty like some I've known." Arya studied him, recalling Sansa once said the Hound was like a dog that had been beaten too often. She couldn't help feeling a strange pang of sympathy, though it warred with her memories of him in the Red Keep. "You fought for Joffrey," she said pointedly. He met her gaze. "And you killed Baelish. We both have our sins, girl." His voice was rough. "You plan to kill me too, eventually?" The hint of irony in his tone caught her off guard. She hesitated, then answered honestly. "You were on my list. But I'm not sure anymore." A flicker of something crossed his eyes, surprise or maybe amusement. He let out a breath, turning away. "Then I'll sleep a bit easier." He moved off, leaving Arya uncertain how to feel. She realized that the lines between enemy and ally had blurred more than she ever expected. The war scattered loyalties like leaves in the wind. The next day, negotiations continued with the Tyrell envoys. Robb demanded concrete terms, a pledge of open hostilities against the Lannisters, coordination of troop movements, and an assurance that once the war was won, the North would be recognized as free and independent. The Tyrells, in turn, insisted on recognition of Margaery's claim to be queen, though that was murky since Renly was dead. They also wanted control of certain contested lands in the Stormlands. It was a tangle of politics that made Arya's head spin. In the midst of all this wrangling, a new raven arrived from near King's Landing. Robb read it in private first, then emerged to speak with Arya and Edmure. The infiltration party had made contact with someone inside the Red Keep, but the attempt to free Sansa had run into complications. They feared she was under constant guard and rarely allowed outside the keep's walls. The letter hinted that Sansa was alive though, which was a relief. The infiltration party would try again, but it was too risky to attempt a rescue without inside help. Arya's heart clenched, imagining her sister locked away day after day. Still, at least there was hope. She clung to that. Amid the swirling negotiations, Tywin continued his brutal campaign elsewhere. Reports reached Riverrun of a large Lannister force regrouping to challenge Robb's next move. Tension soared. In a decisive moment, Robb called Ser Donnell Florent to a final audience. Arya, lurking in the hall, watched Robb speak plainly. If the Tyrells wanted alliance, they must engage the Lannisters at once and move to liberate King's Landing from Joffrey's tyranny. If they refused or delayed, the North would treat them as enemies, same as the Lannisters. Ser Donnell bowed, promising to relay the terms. He departed into the night, leaving the castle full of uneasy anticipation. Days passed. Arya busied herself with her routine, waiting for word from the Tyrells, from Robb's outriders, from the infiltration party, any sign that events might break their way. She sparred so furiously that her muscles ached every morning, but she refused to relent. Her kill list remained in her nightly prayers, though she found herself hesitating when she reached the Hound's name. She muttered it anyway, unsure of what she truly wanted. Baelish's memory lingered like a shadow, a reminder of how swiftly life could end when a blade found its mark. Finally, a raven arrived. The Tyrells had decided. They would openly oppose the Lannisters, forming an alliance with the North and possibly coordinating with Stannis if he still threatened the capital. Mace Tyrell had already sent his bannermen marching east. The letter left certain details vague, but it was enough. Robb assembled his men in the Great Hall to announce that the tide might be turning. A cheer went up. For Arya, the moment was bittersweet. She remembered her father's cautionary lessons about trusting ambitious houses. But right now, the Tyrell alliance might be the best chance to crush the Lannisters swiftly, and that meant a better chance to free Sansa. She could only pray the Tyrells didn't betray them. The war had taught her that allies could shift like sands. Still, as she watched Robb stand before the cheering crowd, she felt a flicker of pride. He had carried the North this far. Perhaps in the end, they would be victorious. In the flurry that followed, the war effort kicked into high gear. Messages flew between Riverrun and the Tyrell forces, coordinating strategy. Robb planned to march east soon, hoping to link up with a Tyrell column to seize key roads leading to King's Landing. The infiltration party's next missive urged caution. Joffrey had grown more paranoid, placing Sansa under even tighter guard. Cersei, too, was wary of infiltration. But they had not discovered the Stark agents yet, or so the letter claimed. Arya pored over these developments from the margins, gleaning whatever details she could. She heard talk that if King's Landing fell to the Tyrells or Stannis, the Lannisters might withdraw entirely to the Westerlands, seeking to defend their ancestral seat at Casterly Rock. That could give Robb the advantage if he timed his moves. The realm was on the brink of a massive shift, and Arya felt the air crackle with anticipation. At last, the day came when Robb declared they would leave Riverrun behind. He would gather his forces and march to join the Tyrell host, aiming to deal the Lannisters a crushing blow before they could regroup. Edmure would remain to defend the castle along with a garrison. Arya would accompany Robb as she had at the beginning. Her stomach twisted with excitement and dread. This would be the largest campaign yet, a decisive push that could end the war or lead them into ruin if it failed. The courtyard was a hive of motion as men packed tents, loaded wagons, and prepared horses. Arya stood by her mare, adjusting the saddle girth. She wore a boiled leather jerkin over her tunic, sword at her hip. She felt older than her years, her eyes flitting across the bustle. She had begun this journey fleeing King's Landing in fear. Now she was marching back toward it, armed with a determination she barely recognized in herself. If the gods were kind, she might see her sister soon, might even stand face to face with Joffrey or Cersei. Robb rode up, gray wind padding beside him. His armor gleamed in the morning sun. Despite his fatigue and sorrow, he projected a calm authority. "Ready?" he asked. She nodded. He offered a small smile, leaning down from the saddle to speak quietly. "Stay close to my guards if there's trouble." She straightened her shoulders. "I can take care of myself." But she said it without anger. She understood now that he worried for her not because he doubted her courage, but because he loved her. They set out, a great train of knights, foot soldiers, and support wagons snaking from Riverrun's gates. Banners snapped in the breeze, stark dire wolves, Tully trouts, and lesser house sigils. The men's spirits were buoyed by news of the Tyrell alliance, and a hum of possibility ran through the ranks. Arya guided her mare onto the road, flanked by Hal Malin and a few others scanning the horizon. Behind them, the walls of Riverrun stood firm, a bastion of Tully strength. Ahead lay the uncertain miles to King's Landing and, perhaps, to final victory or defeat. They passed through villages still scarred by war. Some small folk peered out with wary eyes, uncertain whether this new host was friend or foe. Robb's men tried to reassure them, distributing what food they could spare. Arya saw hollow cheeks and burnt homesteads, a testament to Lannister pillaging. She felt her anger harden. She remembered the moment she ended Baelish's life, thinking it would save her father. That hope had proved false, but perhaps now, with the combined might of the North and the Reach, they could prevent more suffering. Each night, they made camp in a defensive formation, outriders patrolling for Lannister scouts. Arya found her tent near Robb's command area, though she spent much of her time practicing or listening to war councils. She felt the old stir of impatience, but it was tempered by the knowledge that soon they would be at the front lines again. She was not sure how she felt about that. Her stomach quivered at the memory of dead men, the tang of blood, but a resolute voice within her said it must be done. There was no turning back. On the 10th day of marching, scouts reported that a Tyrell column was less than a league away. They would meet at a crossroads near an ancient inn. Robb ordered the army to proceed with caution. Alliances forged on paper could still prove treacherous. But when they reached the crossroads, the Tyrell banners were plainly visible. Rows of well-fed horses, men in gleaming armor, flags bearing the golden rose. A large pavilion stood at the center, from which a handful of knights rode forth to greet Robb. Arya watched with bated breath as the two groups approached. Robb dismounted, though he kept his helm at his side, and strode forward. One of the Tyrell knights removed his own helm, revealing a face Arya recognized from glimpses at tournaments in King's Landing. Ser Loras Tyrell, the Knight of Flowers. He was said to be a great juster and swordsman. He bowed slightly. "Your Grace, my Lord Father has sent me to lead our vanguard. We are pleased to make common cause with the king in the north." Robb inclined his head, measured. "Ser Loras, I hope this alliance proves fruitful for both our houses." The tension was palpable, each side wary, but the handshake they exchanged drew cheers from the ranks. Arya scanned the Tyrell knights. Why seemed confident, well-supplied, and numerous? Their arrival could tip the balance. Ser Loras introduced a few other notable Tyrell men. Robb introduced his own key lords. Arya was not introduced, but she stood behind Robb, chin lifted, as though her presence alone declared her importance. She caught Ser Loras glancing at her quizzically. Perhaps he recalled seeing two Stark girls in King's Landing once upon a time. A war council convened in the Tyrell pavilion. Arya slipped inside with Robb, ignoring any raised eyebrows. Ser Loras outlined the Tyrell plan to march on King's Landing if Stannis' siege still held or if Joffrey retained power. They would smash any Lannister resistance along the way, coordinating with Robb's forces. Robb, for his part, outlined the approach from the Riverlands, anticipating that Tywin might attempt to block them. Loras confirmed that Lord Mace Tyrell was marching with the main host from Highgarden and might arrive in a few weeks with an even larger force. When the talk turned to King's Landing itself, Arya listened intently. The Tyrells wanted to claim the city in Marjorie's name, forging a claim to the Iron Throne. Robb repeated that he had no desire to rule the South, only to liberate his sister and secure the North's independence. Ser Loras seemed amenable. Arya's heart raced at the possibility that soon the capital might fall. Would that be enough to free Sansa? The last question raised by Robb made Arya's stomach clench. "What of Joffrey?" he asked. "Will he be taken alive or executed?" Ser Loras's lips curled. "He ordered the death of Eddard Stark, a noble lord. He's no rightful king. Should he fall into her hands, I doubt many would plead for mercy. But that's a matter we can settle if and when we seize him." Arya felt a shiver. She recalled the monstrous boy on the throne, the way he had reveled in her father's death. A part of her wanted to kill him herself, but the reality would likely be a swirl of chaos. She only hoped Sansa was kept clear of the violence that was sure to erupt. That night, the Stark and Tyrell armies made a joint camp, though they remained in separate sectors for practicality. Arya walked among the tents, seeing Tyrell soldiers polishing armor that shone in the torchlight. They sang songs of Highgarden, of chivalry and romance. It felt surreal after the grim northern marches. She overheard some Tyrell men discussing the possibility of a rightful queen, meaning Marjorie. Others wondered if the Lannisters might strike first. She also picked up rumors that the infiltration party at King's Landing might have signaled that Sansa was still there, possibly betrothed to someone else if Joffrey found it advantageous. The words made Arya's skin crawl. She clenched her fists, hating the idea of Sansa being used for alliances again. As the combined forces moved east in the following days, the roads became more congested with refugees fleeing the war. Arya saw wagons of ragged families, mothers clutching babies, men missing limbs. The Tyrell Outriders and Stark Outriders worked together to keep order, distributing bread where possible. It was a drop in an ocean of misery. Arya's chest tightened at the sight. This was the price of war. She thought of all the suffering inflicted since her father's death, since Baelish's betrayal. Her hatred for the Lannisters only deepened, and yet she saw how so many innocents were caught in the crossfire, no matter who was at fault. Each mile brought them closer to King's Landing. They skirted the edges of Harrenhal, where Lannister banners still flew. Ser Loras advocated bypassing the cursed castle to avoid a protracted siege, focusing on the capital. Robb agreed. Time was of the essence. If Tywin joined forces with Joffrey or if Stannis withdrew, the balance might shift again. So they pressed on, each day hearing fresh rumors about the capital. Some said Stannis had been driven off by wildfire. Others said Joffrey was in a panic, executing anyone suspected of disloyalty. None knew the full truth. Finally, Outriders brought word that a large Lannister host was encamped near the Blackwater Rush, blocking a direct approach to King's Landing. Tywin or some high commander must be gathering forces to defend the city from the Tyrell Stark alliance. Arya sensed the tension ripple through the armies. Another major battle loomed, one that might decide the fate of the realm. The order went out to make camp in a defensible position with the river to one flank. Scouts fanned out to pinpoint the Lannister strength. Ser Loras and Robb spent hours conferring, planning how to best engage. Arya listened from the periphery. A direct frontal assault could be costly. They needed a tactical advantage, perhaps crossing the river upriver or downriver, surprising the Lannisters. The Tyrell foot soldiers were numerous but used to open field battles, not the cunning maneuvers Robb had employed so successfully. The synergy of their styles might prove decisive. Days of maneuvering followed. The armies attempted to outflank the Lannisters, but the Lannisters shifted in response, neither side committing to a pitched battle yet. Skirmishes broke out with each side testing the other's strength. Arya stayed in the main camp under guard, while Robb and Ser Loras led raids. Some nights, men returned wounded, speaking of savage fighting. The tension built to a breaking point. At last, the scouts reported that the Lannisters had taken position near a ford, clearly hoping to hold the crossing. If the Tyrell Stark force could seize that crossing, they could drive straight for King's Landing, forcing Joffrey to defend the walls against overwhelming odds. Robb and Ser Loras decided to force a battle at dawn. The combined armies marched under cover of darkness, forming ranks in the pre-dawn chill. Arya felt her heart pound as she prepared to remain at the rear, guarded. She was no soldier, yet she was here, a witness to war on a scale far beyond anything she'd seen. When the sun's first rays crept over the horizon, horns blared. The Tyrell Knights surged forward in a gleaming tide, their banners bright against the morning sky. The Stark infantry followed in disciplined formation, with cavalry on the flanks. Across the field, the Lannister lines stood, red and gold banners snapping, archers ready. Arya heard the dull roar of men shouting, hooves thundering, metal clashing. She tasted copper on her tongue from nerves, even though she was well behind the front lines. The armies collided in a cacophony of screams and steel. From her vantage point, Arya saw the Tyrell cavalry charge break through the Lannister left flank at first, but then Lannister reinforcements surged in. The Stark foot advanced from the center, while more Tyrell infantry pressed the right. Dust and blood mingled, making it hard to see. She glimpsed shapes of knights falling from horses, swords rising and falling. Trumpets sounded, commands shouted over the din. She yearned to do something beyond just standing with guards who told her to stay back. But she remembered her promise to Robb. She might only be in the way. Tom stretched out. The noise hammered at her ears. At intervals, wounded men staggered back, searching for the maesters and healers. Arya tried to help with water and bandages, her hands shaking. She saw men with limbs missing, screaming for their mothers. She fought nausea, forcing herself to remain steady. Gradually, a cheer arose from the Tyrell lines. Word spread that Ser Loras had pierced the Lannister center, capturing several high-ranking knights. Then a new alarm rang as a group of Lannister cavalry swung around, trying to flank the Stark rear. Arya's breath caught, worried they would strike where she stood. But the Stark reserve cavalry charged out to meet them, halting the threat. Everything was chaos, the tide shifting moment by moment. At last, after what felt like an eternity, the Lannisters began to break. Their lines collapsed in places, men throwing down weapons or fleeing toward the river. The Tyrell Knights gave chase, as did some of the Stark men. A final wave of archers loosed arrows at the fleeing Lannisters, then the horns of victory sounded. Arya realized her hands were clenched so tightly that her nails had bitten into her palms. It was over. The biggest battle she had ever witnessed had ended in a Stark Tyrell triumph. Robb emerged from the swirl, helmet off, face smeared with dirt and sweat. He was alive. Relief crashed over Arya. She rushed forward as far as the guards would allow, seeing him guide his tired horse. He locked eyes with her, gave the faintest nod of reassurance. Men cheered, chanting, "The king in the north." Others hailed House Tyrell. Captured Lannisters were herded together. The field was a horror of bodies and groans. Night fell, and they began sorting the dead and wounded. Arya moved among the tents, offering water, trying not to gag at the smell of blood. She learned that Ser Loras had fought brilliantly, though he'd taken a wound to his arm. Many brave Northerners had fallen, as well as countless Tyrell men. The Lannisters had been routed. The road to King's Landing lay open if the city was not already in other hands. In the quiet that followed, Robb called Arya to his makeshift command tent. She entered, stepping around battered men. Robb stood over a table, sword resting there, face drawn. He looked older than ever. "We've won a great victory," he said softly. "The Lannisters can't stop us from reaching King's Landing now. We'll press on. The Tyrells want to assault the city if Joffrey won't surrender." Arya's mind spun. "What about Sansa?" she asked in a hushed voice. "If they assault the city, she could be caught in the fighting." He nodded gravely. "That's why I'm hoping the infiltration party can secure her before the final assault. Or perhaps Joffrey will see sense and yield her up to save his hide. Either way, we must move quickly before Tywin regroups or Stannis reappears." He laid a hand on her shoulder, concern in his eyes. "Stay close, Arya. The next days will be the most dangerous of all." She steeled herself, recalling the day she slew Baelish. That moment had taught her the finality of violence, the weight of life and death. Now the entire city might face that same edge. "I'm ready," she said, not entirely sure if she believed it. Within a few days, the battered yet triumphant alliance pressed on toward King's Landing. Scouts ranged ahead, reporting minimal resistance. The farmland around the capital showed signs of prior fighting. Stannis' siege, apparently, though rumors suggested he had withdrawn after fierce losses to Wildfire. Joffrey supposedly still held the Red Keep, but the city was starving. The Lannisters' grip might be tenuous. Word of the Tyrell Stark victory spread, causing many Lannister loyalists to desert or flee. Arya felt her heart pound every time the column drew closer to those familiar gates she had once fled. The city walls rose in the distance, smoke drifting from within. She recalled the stench of the capital, the cramped streets, the treachery that had stolen her father's life. Now she returned with an army at her back, a swirl of dread and anticipation roiling in her stomach. Baelish's final betrayal, her father's unjust death, Sansa's captivity, all led here. When at last they reached the outskirts of the city, Tyrell and Stark banners soared in the wind. Thousands of soldiers fanned out, forming lines around the walls. Archers took position, siege engines were assembled. Trumpets sounded. A rider approached the main gate with a white flag, calling for the city to surrender. Tense moments passed. No immediate response came from within. Then the massive gates creaked open a fraction and a small retinue emerged, led by none other than the King's Guard in their white cloaks. Arya watched from behind the lines, breath catching in her throat. The retinue halted at arrow range, a lone figure calling out. She recognized the voice, Ser Marentrant, one of the men on her kill list. Rage flared at the memory of him mocking her father, tormenting Sansa. He proclaimed that Joffrey Baratheon was still king and demanded to know the terms offered by the rebels. A hush fell as Robb rode forward with Ser Loras. Arya couldn't hear all that was said, but she saw Robb's stern posture. He made some declaration. Ser Maren scowled, turned, and rode back into the city. The gates slammed shut. The siege began. For days, the allied forces surrounded King's Landing. Tyrell foragers scoured the countryside, cutting off supplies. King's Landing, already battered by famine and chaos, was on the brink. Inside, Joffrey raged. Word filtered out that he had locked Sansa in her chambers. Arya's hands shook when she heard that. The infiltration party tried again, but the city was locked down. Tension soared. Then, one morning, horns blared across the siege lines. A section of the city's outer walls erupted with commotion. Men shouted. Smoke billowed. Arya realized the Tyrell sappers had breached a weak point near the Mudgate. The final assault on King's Landing had begun. Arya had waited her entire life for this moment, though she had never realized it. She stood now among the gathered armies on the edge of King's Landing, watching smoke billow near the mud gate as Tyrell sappers and engineers hastened to widen their breach. The city that had once seemed an inescapable prison was about to become a battlefield of untold savagery. And here she was, older in spirit than in years, with the memory of her father's death like a knife embedded in her heart. When the horns of war resounded again, their echoes seemed to vibrate through every nerve in her body. The Allied force had been encamped around the capital for days, tightening the noose on the Lannisters with each passing hour. Tyrell outriders prowled the roads, ensuring no supplies or reinforcements reached Joffrey's men, while Stark infantry guarded strategic points along the perimeter. The city, battered by earlier clashes and internal unrest, was vulnerable. Yet Joffrey and his mother, Cersei, refused to yield. Word was that the King's Guard had locked down every district, seizing what little resources remained and hoarding them for the garrison defending the Red Keep. Sansa, so far as Arya knew, was still trapped in some high chamber, a hostage to be dangled in last negotiations. At first light, the Tyrell commanders, along with Robb Stark, had decided enough was enough. There could be no more waiting on infiltration attempts that might never succeed. The city was in agony, the realm was in tatters, and the moment had come to strike a decisive blow. The sappers had targeted a weak section of wall near the mud gate. Foundation cracks from prior battles had never been fully repaired. Now, as Arya glimpsed columns of black smoke wafting overhead, she understood that centuries of stone could crumble if given enough pressure in the right place. She stood by her mare on the outskirts of the siege lines, flanked by a small contingent of northern guards who had been ordered to keep her away from the thickest fighting. They wore the direwolf sigil on their surcoats, battered and dust-coated from previous campaigns. She could sense their tension. None of them relished a street-to-street fight in the capital, for King's Landing was a warren of narrow alleys and twisted corners perfect for ambushes. But the main gate attacks, the attempt to intimidate Joffrey into surrender, had yielded nothing. So now they would force him to bend. Arya wiped her clammy palms on her tunic, wishing her fingers would stop trembling. She reminded herself that she had survived horrors before, had killed a man in the Red Keep. Fear cuts deeper than swords, Syrio had taught her. She had repeated that phrase countless times. A shout went up along the front. 2 Tyrell knights, standards held aloft, raised their horns and blew a resounding call to advance. The first lines of the Allied army began to surge toward the breach. Pikes gleamed, archers readied their bows. Farther down the line, other contingents tested the gate itself, though it remained barred. Siege ladders rose along a portion of the walls where the stone was weaker. Lannister archers fired back from the ramparts, loosing arrows that whistled through the dawn air. In moments, the battlefield erupted in a cacophony of screams, metal striking metal, and the crackle of burning pitch. Arya's breath caught. She saw the glint of armor as the Tyrell vanguard pressed forward. Robb was somewhere in that chaos, leading his men. She had glimpsed him only briefly at dawn. He'd given her a quick embrace, reminded her to stay near Hal Malin and the guard detail, then vanished on his warhorse. The Tyrell cavalry had insisted on charging at certain city gates, though more conservative heads suggested that cavalry was ill-suited for an urban fight. But there was no perfect method to breach a city of 500,000 souls. They had to rely on shock, confusion, and the city's exhaustion. Hal Malin, a broad-shouldered man with lines of worry creasing his brow, frowned at Arya from his saddle. "You'll stay with us, my lady. Don't go wandering off looking for trouble." Arya gritted her teeth. She wanted to snap that trouble had a way of finding her, whether she sought it or not. But she merely nodded, adrenaline thrumming in her veins. In the distance, she saw the shape of the royal banners, the crowned stag lion that Joffrey had adopted, and the older crimson lion of House Lannister. They fluttered from towers above the city walls. Somewhere behind them, Sansa sat captive. Arya's chest tightened with every moment she imagined Sansa's terror. A thunderous crack tore through the air. The sappers must have finished their work. A portion of the wall near the mud gate gave way, collapsing in a spray of dust and stone. Allied soldiers cheered. The Lannisters on the ramparts answered with renewed arrow volleys, but it was too late. A wide opening now yawned where the wall had crumbled. Tyrell infantry surged in, covering their heads with shields. Soon, the first wave of fighting men vanished into the city's gloom. The rest followed, an unstoppable tide. "All right," Hal muttered, turning to the men behind him. "We advance, but keep formation. The king wants no disorganized rush." He glanced at Arya, who was trembling with a mixture of excitement and dread. "Stay in the center," he said firmly. Arya's mare sidled nervously under her. She gripped the reins and forced herself to keep steady. On the horizon, the sun rose higher, revealing a field littered with spent arrows and the bodies of those unlucky enough to have been caught by the early counterfire. The clang and roar beyond the breach suggested that the true battle was starting to churn inside the city. Hal spurred his mount, leading their contingent forward at a measured canter, dust rising around them. Arya's heart hammered. She was going back inside King's Landing, but this time she had an army at her side. As they drew closer to the collapsed section of wall, the smell of smoke and hot stone assaulted her senses. Debris lay in heaps and jagged chunks of masonry jutted out at odd angles. Bodies already stained the rubble, some wearing Tyrell greens, others Lannister crimson. The Allied army had forced a foothold, but not without cost. A group of Tyrell knights stood near the breach, rallying more men to push deeper into Flea Bottom. One knight's horse reared, shrieking, as a crossbow bolt punched into its flank from somewhere within the labyrinth of alleys. Hal Mullen barked an order, and his men raised shields. Arya hunched low in the saddle, scanning for the source of that bolt. The city was a warren of twisting streets, many overshadowed by ramshackle buildings. She remembered the sooty odor and the claustrophobic feel of Flea Bottom from her days scurrying around as a disguised orphan. She had known those roads in fear, trying not to be recognized. Now she was returning with a sword at her hip, but that made it no less dangerous. The Allied ranks pressed forward, staggering over shattered stone. Just beyond, the narrower streets of the capital sprawled out in haphazard directions. Shouts and screams echoed off the walls. Soldiers dashed past, chasing glimpses of Lannister defenders who fired from behind corners or from rooftops. It was chaos. Hal Mullen guided them into a wide lane, flanked by leaning hovels. The mud underfoot was churned with blood and filth, and the stench threatened to overwhelm Arya. A Lannister archer darted out from a side alley, loosing a wild arrow that ricocheted off a Stark guard's shield before lodging in the flank of another horse. A second later, 3 northern spears impaled the archer. Arya swallowed hard, trying not to look too closely at the man's contorted face. The fighting was real, immediate, nothing like the more straightforward battles in open fields. This was close, personal, a massacre in cramped streets. A ragged voice cried from an upstairs window, "The city's fallen, run." A woman's scream followed. Arya felt her stomach twist. She realized there would be innocents everywhere in these winding alleys, shopkeepers, beggars, children. War would not spare them. The thought turned her blood cold, but the unstoppable tide of violence pressed on. Hal led them deeper. The plan, as Arya understood it, was for the Allied vanguard to seize Flea Bottom and the lower city, pushing the Lannisters back toward the inner gates that guarded the hill of the Red Keep. Meanwhile, Tyrell forces along the northern side would try to scale the walls or open the main gates from within. If all went well, the city would be taken in stages, forcing the Lannisters to either surrender or retreat into the castle. And if they retreated, the combined armies would besiege them from every side until Joffrey and Cersei had no choice but to yield. The plan was straightforward on parchment, but in reality it was a swirl of terror. They reached a fork in the lane, and Hal signaled his men to dismount. They tethered the horses near a partially collapsed stable, forming a defensive circle. "We'll move on foot from here," he said, voice echoing above the din of distant fighting. "Too many blind turns for mounted men to be of much use, unless you're a damned fool. We push up that slope, there's a broader street that leads to the market square. If we secure that square, we can link with the main column." Arya slipped off her mare's back. Her legs wobbled. She forced them to steady. In the swirl of activity, no one told her to remain behind with the horses, so she gripped the hilt of her sword, determined to help if she could. Hal caught her eye and shook his head once, but he didn't tell her to stay, perhaps realizing she was too stubborn to remain idle. She followed him and a half-dozen other guards forward. The slope leading up to the market square was a street lined with ramshackle shops and cramped dwellings. Shutters banged in the wind, or else they had been yanked off by terrified residents fleeing the area. Bodies lay sprawled in doorways, some in Lannister livery, some in no livery at all. One groaned softly, reaching out with a blood-slick hand. Arya averted her eyes. They moved methodically, checking each intersection before crossing. The air was thick with smoke, and somewhere far off, a large fire seemed to be burning, perhaps near the river. Arya's heart pounded. This wasn't like slipping through the Red Keep alone, hiding behind columns. Now entire armies clashed, and she was a part of that swirling madness. Every alley could hide an enemy. At one corner, they ran into a pocket of Lannister crossbowmen who fired from behind overturned wagons. One of Hal's men took a bolt to the shoulder, crying out in pain as he collapsed. Arya pressed herself against the wall, hearing the metallic ping of bolts whizzing past. Hal barked for the men to hold their shields forward. Arya ducked behind the line, her breath ragged. She remembered Sirio's words, fear cuts deeper than swords. Focus. She forced herself to do so. Hal signaled two of the guards to advance along the wall while the others laid down covering fire with shortbows. Arya saw a guard launch an arrow that caught one crossbowman in the neck. The man toppled backward with a strangled gurgle. Another crossbowman retreated behind the wagon, frantically reloading. Hal rushed in, brandishing his longsword. Arya heard the thud of blade meeting flesh, a groan, and then silence. The makeshift barricade was theirs. They had no time to celebrate. The man who took the bolt in the shoulder was alive barely. He gasped for breath, eyes rolling. Get him back to the stable, Hal ordered. See if someone can stop the bleeding. Two guards hoisted the wounded man and moved off. Hal looked at Arya, sweat running down his temple. Stay close, he repeated, voice tight. Arya nodded. They continued up the street and soon reached the edge of the market square, which had become a war zone in its own right. The open space was littered with debris, toppled stalls, broken crates, and a tangle of corpses. The stink was overpowering, a mix of rot, smoke, and blood. Across the square, Tyrell men clashed with a group of Lannister soldiers who appeared to be trying to protect a wagon of supplies or weapons. The fighting was brutal, spears thrust through gaps in armor, swords clanged off shields. In the chaos, civilians cowered in doorways or sprinted for cover. Hal waved for Arya to keep her head down as they made their way along the square's perimeter. The plan was to link up with the Tyrell column pressing in from the opposite side. If the market square was secured, it would provide a staging ground for the final push to the castle walls. In theory, that sounded simple. In practice, it was a nightmare of dying men and scattered screams. Arya's feet slipped on something slick, blood pooled on the worn cobblestones. She clutched her sword with a white-knuckled grip. They hurried behind an overturned cart, peering out at the swirling melee. She saw a group of Tyrell men bearing shields with golden roses, locked in formation, slowly pushing the Lannisters back from the center. On the far side, a cluster of Lannister archers fired from a second-story balcony, trying to keep the Tyrells pinned. The middle was a churn of bodies. Hal cursed. We need to flank those archers. Otherwise, they'll pick us off. He turned to Arya. Stay here. But she shook her head furiously, adrenaline surging through her. Before he could protest further, two more crossbow bolts whined overhead and they ducked. When Hal popped up again, he shouted, All right, follow me. But don't do anything foolish. She followed him across a short stretch of open ground, heart pounding so loudly it drowned out other sounds. One of Hal's men loosed an arrow at the balcony, forcing the archers to duck. Hal and Arya dashed beneath the balcony's overhang, pressing close to the building's wall. Now the archers had trouble aiming straight down, giving them a chance to find a back entrance and ascend. If they could clear those archers, the Tyrell men in the square might break the Lannister line entirely. A door stood slightly ajar, a battered wooden affair. Hal shoved it open with his shoulder, revealing a dim corridor cluttered with crates. Dust motes danced in the sparse light. Arya guessed it might be a storage space for a shop. The smell was stale, with a hint of mildew. Hal gestured for silence. They slipped inside, 5 men plus Arya, stepping carefully over the clutter. Stairs led upward in a narrow spiral. Arya could hear voices above, likely the archers reloading crossbows or rummaging for more bolts. Hal signaled 2 men to advance. They crept up the stairs, weapons raised. Arya swallowed hard, following a step behind Hal, her sword hand trembling. She remembered another corridor long ago when she'd cornered Peter Baelish. That had been a single desperate moment. This was a full-scale assault with an entire city at stake. The steps creaked underfoot. The voices above grew louder, men cursing, presumably discussing how best to keep the Tyrells pinned. Suddenly, a crossbow bolt tore through the air from above, striking one of Hal's men in the throat. He toppled backward down the stairs, gurgling, his body slamming into Arya's side. She gasped, almost losing her balance. Hal roared, charging upward. Another crossbow bolt flew, clanging off Hal's shield. With a crash, Hal's men reached the top landing. Arya scrambled past the fallen soldier, ignoring the wave of nausea. Fear cuts deeper than swords. By the time she reached the upper floor, the fighting was already fierce in a narrow hallway. She saw 2 Lannister archers, crossbows cast aside, lunging with short swords against Hal's men. One archer was tall and wiry, his blade flashing in the dimness. Another was smaller, but quick. Hal was locked in a struggle with the tall one, their blades grinding together. One of Hal's men wrestled with the smaller Lannister, the pair smashing into a wooden table that collapsed under their weight. Arya spotted a third archer leaning out a window, trying to reload a crossbow. If he succeeded, he could shoot down on the Tyrells again or pick off Hal's men from behind. She didn't stop to think. She moved swiftly, quiet as a shadow rushing the man. Her worn boots scuffed on the floorboards, alerting him at the last second. He spun, eyes widening, crossbow half-raised. Arya thrust her sword in a clumsy but determined stab. The point took him just below the ribcage. She felt the jarring impact, the sudden give of flesh. The man let out a strangled cry, dropping the crossbow. Blood welled around the blade, warm and slick. Her stomach lurched, but she held on, twisting the weapon free as he staggered and collapsed against the windowsill. For an instant, she froze, staring at the blood on her sword, panting. Then she saw movement behind her. The smaller Lannister archer had broken free from Hal's man and was charging with a snarl, short sword aimed for her back. Instinct took over. Arya whirled and parried, remembering Syrio's stance. Her arms still shook, but she managed to deflect his blow. He snarled again, swinging overhead. She jumped back, stumbled on the floorboards, barely dodging the slash. A sudden slash from the side took the man in the ribs. Hal's soldier had recovered and attacked while the archer was focused on Arya. The Lannister let out a grunt and collapsed, bleeding. Arya's chest heaved. She felt sweat trickling down her spine, her thoughts racing. She just killed another man. Her second kill in as many years after Baelish. But there was no time to reflect, the fighting raged on. Hal Malin had pinned the tall archer against the wall. With a grim grunt, he sank his sword into the man's chest. The archer sagged, eyes glassy. Hal drew back, panting. He glanced at Arya, noticing the blood on her blade and the crossbowman slumped by the window. His eyes flicked between them. "Seven hells," he muttered, though not unkindly. "You truly are a wolf. Are you hurt?" Arya shook her head, too breathless to speak. Hal nodded once. He turned to check the hallway. They had lost one man on the stairs and another was wounded. But the archers were neutralized. Hal beckoned for Arya to look out the window, which offered a vantage over the market square. She peered down. The Tyrell men were advancing across the square, pushing the remaining Lannisters back toward a side street. Without crossbow fire raining down, the Allied forces could secure the area. Indeed, a ragged cheer rose from below as Lannister resistance buckled. "We'll hold this building," Hal said, stepping back from the window. "No more archers using it against us. The rest will join the main push soon. Let's get outside and meet them carefully. Keep your sword ready." Arya nodded, swallowing. The tang of blood and sweat filled her mouth. She tried not to look at the bodies around her as they descended the stairs. Outside, the market square echoed with the last frantic clash of steel. She saw Tyrell knights finishing off a cluster of Lannister men near a toppled statue of Baelor the Blessed. Another group of Lannisters threw down their weapons, shouting for mercy. Once the square was fully in Allied hands, the final wave of fighting would move deeper into the city. A group of peasants, mostly women, children, and a few old men, huddled by a broken fountain, eyes filled with terror and confusion. Some clutched small bundles of belongings. One woman sobbed uncontrollably, repeating, "Gods have mercy." Arya felt a pang in her chest. So many innocents were caught in the crossfire. The Tyrell men in the square tried to corral them out of the line of fire, but some peasants panicked, scattering into alleys. "We're spared no one." Hal spotted a knot of Stark soldiers across the square and waved. They converged, exchanging terse greetings. Some recognized Arya, bowing stiffly to Lady Arya, though they all seemed a bit startled to see her bloodstained and armed. She was sure her face looked pale and grim. There was no time for pleasantries. Word spread that Robb's main force was pushing up from the south, heading for a broad avenue that led toward the Gate of the Gods. Meanwhile, Ser Loras and a large contingent of Tyrell knights had secured a portion of the city's western gates, letting in fresh reinforcements. The plan was working. King's Landing was being choked off from within. Soon, the Allied lines advanced again, pressing toward the heart of the city. Hal and Arya joined them, though Hal insisted they remain near the rear of this new wave. The worst of the fighting was out front, where Lannister loyalists tried to form a defensive barrier along the Street of Steel or near the Street of Flower. The roads were thick with rubble and wreckage from earlier conflicts. Smoke drifted overhead, marking places where fires burned unchecked. As the day wore on, the Allied forces gained ground. Lannister's strongpoints fell one by one, some after fierce resistance. Street by street, King's Landing was wrenched from Joffrey's control, though at a terrible cost. Tyrion Lannister was nowhere to be seen in the chaos. Some said he was absent from the city, others that Joffrey had locked him in the dungeons. Rumors abounded, none confirmed. Arya pushed those thoughts aside, focusing on each moment's survival. Her heart clenched whenever she thought of Sansa behind the Red Keep's walls. Eventually, they reached a small plaza near the Street of Steel. Its forge fires had been extinguished or left smoldering. Weapons lay scattered among the wreckage. Arya recognized it vaguely. She had once roamed near here, chasing a cat back when her father first arrived in King's Landing. It felt like a lifetime ago. The Allied columns paused, reorganizing. Robb, mounted on a lathered horse, appeared at the edge of the crowd, flanked by a handful of bannermen. Arya felt a wave of relief. She broke from Hal's side, pushing forward. Soldiers parted to let her pass, and Robb slid down from his horse upon seeing her. He looked worn, mud-spattered, a cut along his cheek. But he was alive. She flung her arms around him, ignoring the gore that stained his cloak. He hugged her close, exhaling shakily. "Are you all right?" he asked. "I'm fine," she whispered, though her voice shook. "I've stayed with Hal. We took a building with archers, but I'm safe." Robb nodded, brushing her hair aside. "I'm sorry you had to see any of this." Then he turned to speak with Hal, quietly thanking him for keeping Arya alive. The older man bowed, looking both relieved and exhausted. Robb's gaze scanned the battered soldiers around them. "We've pinned what's left of the Lannister host between our lines and the inner city gates. They're retreating toward the Red Keep or trying to hold the city's western approach. The Tyrells have done most of the heavy lifting, but we've had our share of fights." His eyes flicked to Arya. "We have to keep pushing. If Joffrey or Cersei have any sense, they'd consider surrender now. But sense isn't something Joffrey's known for." Arya swallowed. "What if they try to hold the Red Keep? Then we'll have another siege on our hands, but inside the city walls." Robb grimaced. "I pray it doesn't come to that. The city is on the brink as it is. We need to end this quickly. We have more men pouring in from the gates. If the Lannisters are wise, they'll realize they're outnumbered and outmatched." In the distance, a trumpet call echoed from beyond the city's inner walls. Through a haze of smoke, Arya glimpsed the Red Keep perched high on Aegon's Hill, its red stone walls tinted black by drifting ash. Her heart thudded. She recalled its corridors, the hidden passages where she once fled, the place where her father was taken from her. The place where she had found Peter Baelish alone and put an end to his treachery. Everything circled back here. Robb and his men pressed onward, skirmishing with pockets of Lannister defenders along the way. Some surrendered outright when they saw the size of the Allied force. Others fought desperately. Arya stayed behind Robb's lines, heart in her throat. Each hour brought them closer to the Red Keep. She heard horrifying rumors from civilians that Joffrey was ordering the city guard to kill any who even whispered the idea of surrender, that Cersei had locked herself with certain hostages, threatening to kill them if the city fell. The tension weighed on everyone. The more the Allied armies squeezed the city, the more frantic the Lannisters became. By late afternoon, a thick mass of Tyrell and Stark soldiers surrounded the outer courtyard of the Red Keep, having battled through the city's main thoroughfares. Lannister loyalists who had survived the earlier fighting now huddled within the castle gates, still barred behind the high walls. Archers on the ramparts traded arrows with Tyrell bowmen below. Arya stood at the rear of the Allied lines, staring up at those red walls. So many times she had walked inside them as a frightened child. Now she returned with an army behind her, determined to see her sister freed. Robb and Ser Loras convened a hurried council on the edge of the courtyard. Their men set up a perimeter, shields raised against archer fire from the castle. The main gates of the Red Keep stood closed, reinforced with iron. The walls bristled with defenders. Storming them by frontal assault would be costly. But a siege could take weeks, maybe months. The city had already endured too much. A voice called down from the walls. "Stand down, or your precious hostages die." It was not Joffrey, but a guard in Lannister armor. "The king commands that you withdraw." Robb reined in his horse, raising his voice to carry. "I am Robb Stark, king in the north. We have the city. Your men are dead or fleeing. There is no sense in further bloodshed. If Joffrey surrenders and releases his hostages, we will grant terms." A laugh rang out from the ramparts, cruel and mocking. Another guard spat. "The king needs no terms from traitors. If you want the Red Keep, come and die." Boiling pitch rained down from an embrasure, splattering on the ground below. Soldiers scrambled back, cursing. Robb's jaw tightened. Ser Loras's eyes flashed with anger. "We can't let them slaughter more of our men in a fool's attempt to hold a castle that's already lost." One of the Tyrell engineers spoke. "We could bring in siege weapons from the city, but it will take time. They might execute hostages in the meantime." He glanced at Robb. "The Red Keep is formidable. Starving them out could be the easiest way, but it'll take weeks if they have stores. The rest of King's Landing will suffer in the meantime." Arya's voice cut through the debate, surprising them. "What if there's another way in?" She stepped forward, ignoring their startled looks. When I was a child here, I heard rumors of hidden passages, old tunnels in the Red Keep. Some say the Targaryens built them. I used them once, or at least I found parts of them. Varys, the spider, used them too. There might be ways to slip inside that the Lannisters aren't guarding. Robb studied her. Arya, that's risky. If the Lannisters discover a small party sneaking in, they'll kill them before they make any difference. She lifted her chin. We can't let Sansa or anyone else be a hostage. If Joffrey is cornered, he might do something monstrous. I can find my way. I've done it before. Ser Loras looked uneasy, glancing at Robb. The idea of infiltration again. We have more men now. Could we not attempt a direct assault on a side tower or Sallyport? Robb shook his head. We'd lose too many men that way and they'd simply fall back deeper into the castle. If Arya knows a route that leads to the heart of the keep, perhaps the throne room or the royal apartments, then a small party could slip in, capture or kill Joffrey and open the gates from within. It's a gamble, but it might save hundreds of lives. Arya took a breath. I'll need people who can move quietly. Not a massive force. 10 or so at most. If we succeed, we end this quickly. If we fail, she didn't finish the sentence. She knew what failure meant. Robb's eyes held a mix of pride and fear. I won't let you go alone. I'll come with you. My lord, said Hal Malin, stepping forward, you can't risk your life like that. You're the king in the north. If something happens to you. Robb silenced him with a look. We stand to lose more if this siege drags on. If we save Sansa and end Joffrey, we free thousands from tyranny. I'll risk it. Arya's right. A direct assault is madness. A stealth approach is our best chance. He turned to Loras. Hold the perimeter here. Keep them busy, but don't launch a full attack. We'll slip inside under cover of night. Ser Loras hesitated but bowed. As you command. May the gods be with you. That night, the allied forces feigned preparations for a siege, dragging forward catapults and constructing barriers. The Lannisters on the ramparts hurled insults and occasional arrows, but no large-scale battle erupted. Under cover of darkness, Robb selected 10 men he trusted, Hal Malin among them, a couple of veterans who had served Eddard Stark in Winterfell, and the Hound. The last inclusion surprised Arya, but Robb explained quietly, he knows the Red Keep's corridors well, and he hates Joffrey. If we can trust him not to turn on us, he'll be an asset. Arya eyed the Hound warily when he was told of the plan. He let out a harsh laugh. Sneaking into the cursed keep with a handful of men? You've got guts, Stark. If it means I can see the whelp's face when he realizes he's beaten, count me in. They set off in the hour before midnight, while the main camp's fires flickered. The city itself was quiet, battered by the day's fighting, with only scattered patrols. Arya led the group through the rubble-strewn streets, navigating by faint moonlight and her memories of the back alleys. She recalled the route she had once taken from the Red Keep to Flea Bottom, though now many buildings were damaged or burned. More than once, they had to detour around collapsed structures or Lannister patrols. The tension was suffocating. One misstep, one shouted alarm, and they'd have the entire garrison upon them. Eventually, they reached a discreet cul-de-sac near the walls of the Red Keep. It was blocked by fallen timbers, but after clearing some debris, Arya found a narrow gap that led toward an old drain, long rumored to be a hidden passage for contraband smugglers. She had never used it herself, but she'd heard whispers in the kitchens back when she was just a curious child. If the keep's defenders assumed any infiltration, they would expect it at the Sallyports or postern gates, not an ancient drain. Or so Arya hoped. With great effort, they pried open a rusted iron grate. A foul stench wafted out, making them gag. The drain was half filled with stagnant water and sludge. The men cursed, but no one turned back. The Hound growled that it reeked worse than a flea-bottom brothel. Robb, teeth set, moved forward. Quiet, he warned. We don't know who might be nearby. They slipped into the tunnel, wading through knee-deep filth. Rats squeaked along the slimy stone, scattering at their approach. Arya fought back the urge to retch. She held a small torch wrapped in oilcloth to keep its light minimal and to prevent the worst of the dripping water from putting it out. The flickering glow revealed a narrow passage that sloped upward. The men followed in single file, shields strapped to their backs, swords or axes in hand. After what felt like hours of trudging, they reached a junction. Arya led them down the left side, recalling the rumor that this drain connected to a sub-level of the keep's dungeons. Hal slid forward to test the stone, discovering a grated panel overhead. Together, they heaved it open, stepping into a cramped antechamber that smelled of mildew and old iron. Here, the floor was relatively dry. The torchlight revealed half-collapsed wooden racks, once used for storing supplies or hidden contraband. No sign of guards. Robb exhaled softly. We're inside. Hal nodded, scanning for threats. The men formed a small circle, weapons at the ready. The hound's eyes glinted under the torchlight. Aye, we are. And if we're lucky, no one's wise to it yet. He jerked his head at a stone staircase that spiraled up from the corner of the room. That'll lead to the lower dungeons. The question is, who do we run into first? Rob extinguished the torch, trusting the faint moonlight from above to guide them now that they were out of the water. They moved quietly up the spiral stairs, each step a risk. Arya's heart hammered, her boots squelching with half-dried sludge. Memories of wandering the Red Keep alone came flooding back, except now she had allies and a mission to dethrone Joffrey. Every corner might hold guards or some locked door that would trap them. The first real obstacle appeared when they reached an iron-bound door at the top of the stairs. Voices drifted through the cracks, indicating at least 2 guards beyond. Rob motioned for silence. The men exchanged grim looks, preparing for a swift attack. The hound stepped forward, pressed his ear to the door, then nodded to indicate the guards were close. On a silent count, they shoved the door open. Light spilled into a torchlit corridor. 2 red-cloaked guards spun in alarm. The nearest tried to raise his spear, but the hound slashed out with terrifying speed, gutting him. The other guard opened his mouth to shout, but Hal Malin barreled into him, driving a sword through his chest. Both men crumpled. The corridor fell silent except for the men's ragged breathing. They dragged the bodies aside, pressing themselves against the corridor walls. The architecture was all too familiar, high-vaulted ceilings, flaming torches set in iron sconces. The Red Keep's labyrinth of halls. Arya closed her eyes for a heartbeat, remembering how she had once hidden behind pillars and curtains. Now she was the intruder again, but with a very different purpose. Rob crouched by the nearest guard's body, rifling through pouches. He frowned. Keys. Might be useful. He took them, sliding them into his belt. Then he turned to Arya. We need to find a way up to the main floors. If we can get to the royal apartments or the throne room, we might corner Joffrey or at least force them to negotiate. Arya nodded, scanning the corridor. She recognized a side passage that led toward the dungeons. That was where her father had been kept, where she had lost hope so long ago. She forced the memory aside. This way, she whispered. If we keep going, we'll come to a guard station near the upper cells. Beyond that, there's a set of stairs that lead to the main keep. But it's always guarded. Hal's lips thinned. We'll handle it. Move. They advanced cautiously, passing heavy iron doors that likely led to cells. A few distant moans came from behind them or the shuffle of prisoners. The sound made Arya's skin crawl. She remembered how father had been dragged down here. Her grip on her sword tightened. If the infiltration party was discovered, they would all end up rotting in these cells, or worse. She heard the hound mutter curses under his breath, clearly uneasy in these depths. But none of them faltered. Rounding a corner, they spotted a lit guardroom at the end of the hall. For Lannister's soldiers sat around a small table, the remains of a meal scattered about. One was dozing, arms folded, another sharpened a dagger. The other 2 talked in low voices about the chaos in the city. The infiltration party paused in the shadows. Rob studied the guardroom. We can't slip by unseen, he murmured. We'll have to take them. Hal readied his sword, giving quiet signals to the men. Arya positioned herself near the back, though she knew she might have to fight. The hound's eyes gleamed as he hefted his blade. On an unspoken cue, they surged forward. One of the Lannisters had time to let out a startled yelp before the hound's blade cleaved his throat. Another tried to scramble for his spear, but Rob slammed into him, driving him to the floor. Hal's men dispatched the remaining 2 in a flurry of steel. It was over in heartbeats, leaving all 4 Lannisters dead or dying on the guardroom floor. The noise of the scuffle had been brief, but echoes carried in these stone corridors. They froze, listening for any sign that more guards were coming. Silence, apart from the ragged breathing of the infiltration party. Rob wiped his sword, face grim. We go on. Arya's pulse pounded. She glanced at the lifeless eyes of a guard, just some man unlucky enough to serve a cruel king. Yet there was no pity in her heart. This was war, the final act that would end Joffrey's tyranny. She steeled herself and followed Rob to a stairway beyond the guardroom. This stone flight was broader, leading upward. They ascended, senses alert for any watchers. At the top, another heavy door. Rob tried the keys he had taken from the guard's corpse. It clicked. Light flooded in as he opened the door a crack. Beyond lay a corridor that Arya recognized from her memory. Gilded sconces, deep red carpets. A more opulent area of the keep near the royal apartments. Her heart fluttered. This was the realm of kings and queens, the place where she had once roamed as a highborn girl, entirely out of place. Now she returned as a wolf at the door. Rob signaled them to slip into the corridor. The group moved like shadows, hugging the walls. Occasional candles flickered in alcoves, revealing tapestries that depicted past Targaryen glories. No guards were immediately visible, but distant footsteps approached. They ducked behind a large decorative screen, pressing themselves close. A pair of Lannister guards trudged by, muttering about the siege. Once they vanished around a corner, Robb gestured for them to continue. They passed several doors. Arya tried to recall which led to the throne room or the Great Hall. The Red Keep could be a maze, but she knew that one particular corridor would lead to the grand staircase. From there, the throne room was not far. Her pulse hammered at the thought. If Joffrey was anywhere, it might be in the throne room or his personal chambers. Another possibility was that he was holed up with his mother, Cersei, in Maegor's Holdfast. But if they took the throne room first, it would send a clear message. At an intersection, they spotted more Lannister guards posted, too many to fight without causing an alarm. The infiltration party ducked into a side corridor. Arya found a narrow servant's passage behind a tapestry, just as she recalled. They slipped through, emerging near a stairwell that would bypass the main intersection. The hush was eerie. She realized how easily she might have traveled these corridors long ago, eavesdropping on secrets. The memory felt like another life. Finally, they neared the double doors that led to the throne room antechamber. 2 Lannister guards stood outside, tense, as though expecting trouble. Their posture suggested they were listening for noises of fighting from beyond. Robb and Hal exchanged glances. They would have to do this quietly or quickly. The infiltration party crept closer. One of Hal's men stepped on a loose floor tile, making a clack that echoed. The guards snapped to alert, raising their weapons. Robb sprang forward with his men. The guards shouted an alarm, but were swiftly cut down before they could flee. Panting, Robb pressed an ear to the massive doors. A faint murmur came from within. Torchlight glowed under the threshold. No immediate sounds of battle or a large garrison. Possibly only a handful of people inside. Hal exhaled. We might have lost the element of total surprise. We need to move now. Robb nodded, pushing open the doors. They swung inward on squealing hinges. Inside, the throne room lay shadowy, lit by scattered braziers. Pillars soared up to a vaulted ceiling. The great iron throne loomed at the far end, twisted metal reflecting the uncertain firelight. Arya's eyes swept the massive chamber, heart-hammering. She saw a cluster of figures near the dais. Joffrey Baratheon stood there, robed in gold-trimmed finery, his face a rictus of anger. Cersei Lannister was beside him, pale and tense. Around them, a handful of guards, including Ser Marentrant of the King's Guard, swords drawn. A smaller figure huddled behind them, Sansa. Arya's breath caught at the sight of her sister. Sansa wore a torn gown, her hair disheveled, eyes wide with terror. She was alive, but clearly a prisoner. At the sound of the infiltration party's entrance, Sansa's gaze snapped to them, recognition flooding her face. She let out a choked cry, Arya or Robb. Her voice echoed in the chamber. Joffrey snarled, whirling around. You dare enter here? He spat. His voice was shrill with fury. You traitors think you can breach my castle? Robb stepped forward, sword in hand, flanked by Hal Malin and the others. Your city has fallen, Joffrey, he said, voice echoing through the throne room. Lower your weapons. Release my sister. Ser Marentrant sneered, shifting his stance. A few red-cloaked guards spread out behind him, blocking the dais. Joffrey bared his teeth in what might have been a grin. My city? You think you've won? My mother has archers on the walls. We'll burn the entire keep if we must. Cersei said nothing. Her face was carved with rage and fear, one arm protectively around Sansa as though to keep her pinned in place. Another Kingsguard stood behind them, Ser Boros blunt, sweaty, and uncertain. The tension was suffocating. Arya's eyes darted to Sansa. If a fight erupted, they might kill her. Robb's men fanned out, forming a line in front of the dais. The Hound stood among them, glaring at Joffrey. He spoke in a low rasp. Best watch that tongue, boy, unless you want it ripped out. This is over. Joffrey froze, gaze flicking in disbelief. Hound? You dare betray me? The Hound's scarred face twisted in contempt. I was never yours to command. I told you once, I serve no one but myself. Now let the girl go. Joffrey snatched a dagger from his belt, pressing it to Sansa's side. She let out a gasp of pain. You come near me and I'll cut her open, Joffrey hissed. His eyes flicked to his mother for guidance, but Cersei's lips trembled. She looked at the infiltration party, at Robb's unwavering blade, and she seemed to realize how dire the situation was. The entire city was lost, the Red Keep about to fall. Cersei's voice wavered. If you kill my son, your sister dies. Do you think we'll go quietly? We still have men loyal to us. Hal Malin spat, not enough to stop the entire host. Don't be a fool. Robb took a measured step forward, sword pointed at the dais. "This ends now, Joffrey. Release my sister, yield the throne, and we'll spare your lives. You'll face justice for my father's murder, but if you surrender peacefully, perhaps you'll see mercy." "Mercy!" Joffrey shrieked. His face was blotchy with rage. "I'll give you mercy." He raised the dagger, about to dig it into Sansa's ribs. Arya felt a jolt of horror. Suddenly, Ser Meryn Trant grabbed Joffrey's arm. "My lord, my king, you can't kill her. They'll butcher us all." Joffrey wheeled, eyes wild. "Unhand me. I am your king, you pathetic coward. Obey me." He jerked away. Sansa, seeing an opening, twisted free of Cersei's grip, stumbling forward with a cry. That was all the infiltration party needed. Hal Mullen lunged forward, as did Robb. The Lannister guards rushed to protect Joffrey, swords clashing in a shriek of steel. Arya darted to the side, eyes locked on Sansa, who stumbled across the dais steps, unsteady. Cersei tried to yank her back, but Sansa twisted free again. For a wild moment, the throne room dissolved into chaos. Robb's men battling the Kingsguard, Joffrey howling threats, and Cersei retreating, screeching for help. The Hound cut down a red-cloaked guard with brutal efficiency, pivoting to face Ser Meryn Trant. Ser Meryn hissed a curse, raising his blade in a standard guard. The Hound bared his teeth. "I owe you for a few things, Kingsguard." Their swords met in a thunderous clash, sparks flying. Arya circled wide, searching for an opening to reach Sansa. Joffrey slashed wildly at Hal Mullen, who parried with a grunt. The boy king was no real swordsman, relying on anger more than skill. Yet that dagger threatened to do real harm if it caught flesh. Hal tried to disarm him, but Joffrey lashed out with savage desperation. Meanwhile, Ser Boros Blunt fended off two of Robb's men, sweat pouring down his face. Robb himself advanced on Joffrey, determined to end this. Arya saw Sansa stagger off the dais, chest heaving. She was free of Cersei's grip for the moment, but two Lannister guards rushed in, presumably to seize her again. Before Arya could move, Robb dashed forward, intercepting them with a fierce overhead swing that sent one guard sprawling. The other guard turned, raising his weapon, but then a flash of steel from Hal Mullen ended him, a clean thrust through the back. Sansa stood trembling, tears in her eyes. Arya seized her sister's hand, pulling her away from the swirling fight. "Come on!" She half expected Sansa to protest or faint, but Sansa clung to her like a lifeline. They slipped off to the side of the throne room, near a massive column, out of the direct fray. Sansa's voice cracked as she spoke. "Arya, I thought I'd never see you again." Her face was tear-streaked, hair matted with sweat and fear. Arya's heart twisted. "You're safe now," she whispered, though the clang of steel reminded her how fragile that promise was. "Stay behind me." She brandished her sword, scanning the dais. Joffrey was still alive, shockingly enough, though hemmed in by Robb and Hal Mullen. The rest of the infiltration party struggled with the Kingsguard. The Hound roared as Ser Meryn Trant's blade bit into his shoulder, but he responded by smashing his pommel into Trant's helm. The blow rang out across the cham. "Oh!" Ser Meryn reeled, blood streaming from his temple. Cersei, eyes wild, tried to run for a side door. One of Robb's men blocked her path, sword raised. She shrieked, scrabbling for a hidden dagger. "Get away from me, you northern filth!" The man slapped the dagger from her hand, grabbing her by the arm. Cersei kicked and spat, but she was overpowered. Arya watched, remembering all the times she had cursed Cersei's name. A swirl of savage satisfaction rippled through her, tempered only by the knowledge that the fighting was not yet done. On the dais, Joffrey lashed out again, cutting a shallow line across Hal's forearm. Hal hissed but recovered, swinging his sword in a wide arc. Joffrey tried to jump back and collided with the Iron Throne itself, nearly slicing his own arm on the jagged metal spines. He let out a yelp, forced to lunge away from the seat. Robb was there, sword aimed at Joffrey's chest. Their eyes met. Joffrey bared his teeth, panting. "You'll never, I am the king." Robb's voice was hoarse. "You murdered my father." Joffrey sneered. "I did what kings must. He was a traitor. And you're nothing but a dog off its leash. You'll die with the rest of your stinking north." Robb's rage flashed. His blade whipped out in a savage backhand slash. Joffrey scrambled away, howling, "Mother! Guards! Help!" But Cersei was already held fast, and most of the guards were either dead or fighting for their lives. Joffrey's eyes darted around, frantic. He tried to run, but Robb caught him with a punch to the side of the head, sending him sprawling onto the dais steps. Hal pinned Joffrey's arm with his boot. Arya felt her breath catch. This was the man, no, the boy who had grinned as her father was executed. The one who had threatened Sansa's life. She wanted to see him punished, see him tremble the way he had made them tremble. Joffrey spat blood, face twisted in agony. The infiltration party closed in, subduing Ser Maren Trant at last. The hound kicked Trant's sword away, pressing a boot on the fallen Kingsguard's neck. Silence fell over the throne room, broken only by ragged breathing and the crackle of torches. Robb stood above Joffrey, sword leveled at his throat. Hal hovered beside him, wounded but resolute. The other infiltration men ringed the dais, their weapons glinting. Arya guided Sansa closer, heart pounding. They had won. The throne room was theirs. Joffrey's chest heaved. If you kill me, the Lannisters will hunt you to the ends of the earth, he shrieked, but the threat rang hollow. The entire city was overrun. Tywin's forces were scattered. The Tyrells and Starks had proven victorious. Cersei sobbed, still in the grip of a northern soldier. Her eyes were wild with desperation. The last living Kingsguard stared in stunned horror. Robb glanced at Sansa, then at Arya. A moment of shared grief and fury hung in the air. Joffrey had stolen their father's life. He had tormented Sansa, condemned the North to war, and inflicted untold misery on the realm. Robb's hand tightened on his sword hilt. Then his gaze flicked to Arya, as if asking a silent question. Should he do it now or offer some form of justice? Arya stepped forward, thoughts swirling. She remembered the day on the steps of the Great September, her father's head taken in a single stroke. She recalled cutting Peter Baelish's throat in that lonely corridor, an act of vengeance that had changed her forever. This moment was bigger, more public, but no less personal. Joffrey cowered on the dais steps, breathing raggedly. The memory of his sadistic grin burned in her mind. Sansa let out a quiet sob, pressing a hand to her mouth. Arya could feel her sisters trembling. So much had been lost. Perhaps the only justice was to end Joffrey's life here, in the very throne room where he had welcomed her father's death. Robb hesitated. I should put you in chains, he told Joffrey, voice taut. Bring you before a proper court, but you gave my father no such mercy. Joffrey snarled. I'm the rightful king. No one can judge me, no one. Robb's sword flashed downward, slicing across Joffrey's chest. Blood welled. Joffrey screamed. It was not a mortal blow, more of a shallow slash meant to silence him. Robb's voice trembled with anger. Kneel. Atonement is the only chance you have. The boy king coughed, blood flecking his lips. His sneer wavered. A hush fell, everyone watching. Slowly, Joffrey sank to his knees, forced down by Hal's boot. Robb exhaled, fury still burning in his gaze. You took my father's head, he said. Now, by all the laws of gods and men, you stand guilty of murder, treason, and tyranny. I, Robb Stark, king in the north, sentence you to. But Joffrey howled, Never! And lunged upward, dagger flashing again from beneath his cloak. Robb swore, trying to jerk back. Hal moved to intercept, but the dagger scraped Robb's side. Robb gasped in pain, staggering. Joffrey rose, wild with desperation, ready to stab again. Arya's body moved before her mind caught up. She darted in, raising her sword. In a single fluid thrust, she drove the blade into Joffrey's midsection, just as she had with Baelish. The angle was messy. She felt the jolt of metal hitting bone. Joffrey's eyes bulged. He let out a ragged gurgle, dropping his dagger. Blood stained the embroidered gold of his tunic. For a heartbeat, he stared at her in disbelief. Then he crumpled to the floor, mouth slack, the life fleeing his eyes. A hush fell so profound it felt like the room itself was holding its breath. Arya stood there, chest heaving, her sword still impaled in Joffrey's body. Then she pulled it free, the blade scraping as it exited. Blood pooled on the dais steps. She felt numb, as though she were watching someone else's hand commit the act. But this was her. She had ended Joffrey Baratheon, the boy king who had destroyed her family's world. Cersei let out an unholy wail, straining against her captor. Joffrey! She screamed, voice cracking. She tried to rush forward, but the guard held her firm. Ser Meryn Trant, pinned by the hound, groaned in horror. Sansa stared in shock, tears running down her cheeks. Hal Malin inhaled sharply, shaking his head as though not quite believing what he'd witnessed. Robb pressed a hand to his bleeding side, wincing, his eyes fixed on Arya. His expression was a storm of grief, relief, and sorrow. Arya lowered the sword, her arms trembling. Joffrey's corpse twitched once, blood dribbling from his mouth. She could almost hear Baelish's dying gurgle in her memory. This kill felt no less final. A swirl of emotions threatened to overwhelm her: vengeance, fear, a numb acceptance. She felt Sansa's hand on her shoulder, shaky but there. Arya turned, meeting her sister's eyes. Neither could speak. A distant pounding of boots approached. More allied soldiers flooded into the throne room, led by some Tyrell men. They took in the scene. Joffrey's body sprawled on the dais, Cersei in captivity. The infiltration party battered but alive. The hush turned into a flurry of exclamations. "The Boy King is dead," someone shouted. Another cried, "The Red Keep is ours." Ser Loras Tyrell arrived moments later, panting, a makeshift bandage on his arm. His eyes widened at the sight of Joffrey's corpse. Then he took a breath and faced Robb, who remained upright despite his wound. "We overcame the last defenders at the gates," Loras reported. "The castle is under our control." Robb nodded, swallowing hard. "Then it's done," he murmured. He turned to Arya, his voice hushed. "You did it. We put an end to Joffrey's reign." Arya felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes, though she wasn't sure if they were tears of relief or anguish. She looked down at the dead boy at her feet, recalling the monstrous grin he had worn when her father was executed, remembering the torment he'd inflicted on Sansa. She had wanted him dead for so long, yet she felt hollow. She only nodded wordlessly. Sansa squeezed Arya's shoulder. "You saved me," she whispered. Her voice trembled with a mix of gratitude and horror. "Thank you." She glanced at Joffrey's body and turned away, retching quietly. Arya wrapped an arm around her, guiding her away from the gruesome sight. Cersei's screams continued until a soldier forced a gag into her mouth, dragging her to the side. She kicked and clawed, but they held her fast. The infiltration party secured the last of the Kingsguard. Ser Meryn Trant was disarmed, cursing them until the hound cuffed him hard across the jaw, knocking him unconscious. Others scurried to tend to Robb's wound. He waved them off gently, indicating it was not fatal. In the minutes that followed, chaos swirled in the throne room as more soldiers arrived, stunned by the scene. Some cheered at the sight of Joffrey dead, others remained grimly silent, knowing the cost and blood that had brought them here. Tyrell knights took positions at the entrance, while a few of Robb's men ringed the dais. The Iron Throne loomed above it all, a twisted relic of old conquests. At last, Robb limped toward Arya and Sansa, pulling them into a tight embrace. The moment felt unreal. They were in the same throne room where their father had once stood, hoping for justice, only to find betrayal. But now the Starks had taken the city, dethroned Joffrey. A wave of grief for Ned washed over Arya. He would never see this. He would never know they avenged him. But she felt a spark of peace in her chest, however small. "It's over," Robb whispered, though he sounded uncertain. "At least, the Lannisters are broken. We have the capital. We can negotiate the realm's future, free the North, maybe form a new peace." Father would have wanted that. Arya closed her eyes. She couldn't quite imagine what peace would look like, but for this moment they had victory. She clung to her brother and sister, blocking out the stares of soldiers, ignoring Cersei's muffled wails. She felt the weight of Baelish's ghost, the memory of the corridor where she first killed for vengeance. Now a second name was crossed off her list. Joffrey was gone. The father's debt was paid in blood. In the coming hours, the Red Keep was secured. Tyrell and Stark banners were hoisted. Lannister loyalists who remained threw down their arms or were taken prisoner. A hush fell over King's Landing as word spread that Joffrey was dead, that the war had turned in favor of the North and the Reach. Some wept with relief, others with fear of what came next. Arya helped guide Sansa to safer chambers, ignoring the stench of the corridor. Sansa walked as though in a daze, leaning on Arya's arm. She had bruises on her wrists and her eyes were red from crying, but she seemed physically unharmed. Arya offered comfort in the form of quiet presence, unsure how to bridge the gap that had grown between them over these terrible years. But they were sisters and they were alive. Robb's wound was tended by a maester who had survived the chaos. It proved shallow, though painful. Ser Loras Tyrell and other High Lords gathered for a makeshift council in the Great Hall, determining how to restore order to the city. They appointed Tyrell men to oversee distribution of food, hoping to calm the starving populace. Northern Knights patrolled the streets to keep looting in check. The realm needed stability. Cersei was locked in a guarded chamber, ranting that Tywin would come avenge her. But Tywin had been defeated in the field and his power was broken. Rumor held that Jaime was still a captive in the Riverlands. The Lannisters no longer posed a serious threat. Stannis Baratheon might still lurk somewhere with a battered fleet, but for now, King's Landing belonged to the alliance of North and Reach. In the days that followed, the city slowly began to breathe again. Merchants opened shops, albeit cautiously. The small folk, battered by war, emerged from hiding to see a new banner flying atop the Red Keep, a dire wolf and a golden rose side by side, a sign of unity. Streets were cleared of rubble and the dead were buried in mass graves. Arya wandered the corridors of the keep, feeling a ghostly echo of her younger self. She caught glimpses of the hush that now filled the halls. Joffrey's name was cursed in corners, praised by no one. The realm would not mourn him. For Sansa, recovery was slow. She barely slept, haunted by nightmares of Joffrey's cruelty and the day she almost died. Arya stayed near her, offering what comfort she could. Sometimes they sat together by a window overlooking Blackwater Bay, saying little, just existing side by side. It felt fragile, but it was a start. Sansa would brush a hand through her tangled hair and whisper how she missed their father, how she wished none of this had happened. Meanwhile, Robb presided over councils to decide the shape of the realm's future. Mace Tyrell arrived in pomp, proclaiming his daughter Margaery the rightful queen, though whom she would marry or what throne she might claim was unclear now that Joffrey was gone. Some suggested crowning Robb as king of all Westeros, but he refused, declaring he only wanted northern independence. Others pointed out that Stannis might still press his claim. Negotiations were long, complicated, and overshadowed by the city's urgent needs for food and rebuilding. Arya took no part in the intrigues. She found a sense of distance from the politicking. All she wanted was to ensure the North was free, Sansa was safe, and the realm would not again devour her loved ones. She spent time exploring the keep's secret passages again, now without fear. The halls felt less oppressive, though ghosts lingered at every turn. She passed the corridor where she had slain Peter Baelish. The memory struck her with fresh clarity, his shocked eyes, the spray of blood. That act, so unthinkable before, had turned her into someone she barely recognized. Yet it led her here, to the day she slew Joffrey as well, finishing the vengeance that had begun when her father died. One day, as Arya walked the battlements of the Red Keep, she found the Hound leaning against a crenellation, gazing out at the city below. A warm breeze ruffled his cloak. His arm was bandaged from the wound Ser Meryn had given him, but he seemed untroubled by pain. She approached cautiously, not sure how he would react. He glanced over, letting out a curt grunt. "Little Wolf," he said, a new moniker he'd taken to using. "Come to enjoy the view of your conquest?" She stopped a few paces away, looking down at the sprawl of King's Landing. Smoke no longer poured from rooftops, the city seemed calmer. "I'm not enjoying it," she said quietly. "But I'm glad we ended Joffrey's reign." He snorted. The whelp had it coming. "Still, it's a messy business, ripping out the heart of a realm. What next? You think your brother's going to plant daisies on the Iron Throne?" Arya shook her head. "He doesn't want the throne. He wants the North to be free. And if the rest of the kingdom sorts itself out, so be it." The Hound barked a rough laugh. "Free, right? Well, I suppose it's not my concern now. With the Lannisters broken, I've no reason to keep to your brother's side." Arya regarded him warily. "Will you leave?" He shrugged. "Maybe. Or maybe I'll stick around a while, see if the world gets any less rotten. Not that I'm holding my breath." He tapped a mailed glove on the stone. "You killed him, you know? The whelp. You sure you're all right with that?" A wave of emotion fluttered through her chest. She recalled the moment her blade sank into Joffrey, the same savage finality she had dealt Baelish. "He killed my father," she said softly. "He would have killed my sister. I did what had to be done." The Hound regarded her a moment, then nodded. Well, maybe that's enough." He turned back to the city, leaving her to her thoughts. That night, a feast was held in the Great Hall to celebrate the Alliance's victory, though it was a somber affair. Tables were laden with what food remained, musicians plucked half-hearted tunes, and knights toasted the memory of fallen comrades. Robb sat at the high table with Mace Tyrell, looking weary. Sansa joined them briefly before withdrawing, still overwhelmed by the crowd. Arya stood at a corner, picking at bread. She remembered another feast in Winterfell so long ago, a simpler time. Nothing would ever be the same. After the feast, in a smaller chamber, Robb, Sansa, and Arya gathered for a quieter meal. They spoke hesitantly of Winterfell, of their mother and brothers. The Ironborn threat to the north still existed, though ravens suggested Bolton's forces were pushing them back. In time, maybe the Starks could return home. Arya felt a pang of longing for the cold, clean air of Winterfell, the sound of the godwood leaves rustling. But she also knew she had changed too much to go back to being a carefree girl. When Sansa spoke of the horrors she endured as Joffrey's hostage, a flicker of guilt crossed Arya's heart. She remembered leaving King's Landing without her, though it had been impossible to do otherwise. She remembered killing Baelish in a desperate attempt to save their father, a deed that changed nothing about his fate, yet changed everything else. She reached across the table, taking Sansa's hand gently. "We're together now," she said, voice tight with emotion. "That's what matters." Sansa nodded, eyes brimming with tears. They sat in silence for a long while, letting the swirl of voices and footsteps from the halls pass them by. The realm would demand much of them in the days ahead: negotiations, settlements, the forging of a new order. But at least the shadow of Joffrey's cruelty was gone, replaced by a fragile hope. In the weeks that followed, the city's new leadership took shape. With Joffrey dead, the Iron Throne was vacant. Some urged that Margaery Tyrell become queen, perhaps by wedding a suitable candidate. Stannis Baratheon sent a raven demanding recognition of his claim, but few in King's Landing were inclined to obey him after the devastation of his earlier siege. Robb, for his part, pressed only for the independence of the North, forging an agreement with the Tyrells that if they recognized the North's sovereignty, the Starks would not interfere in the South's chosen monarchy. Mace Tyrell seemed amenable, eager to secure his own power and hoping to shape the realm for his daughter's benefit. Cersei fumed in captivity, awaiting trial for her role in Ned Stark's murder and the subsequent tyranny. Jaime Lannister, still a prisoner in the Riverlands, might be used as a bargaining chip in any final settlement. Tyrion's whereabouts were uncertain. Rumors placed him in Pentos or the Free Cities, having fled before the siege. The Lannister legacy had collapsed, undone by its own cruelty. As the capital settled into a shaky peace under Tyrell's stewardship, Robb prepared to lead his army north. The war was effectively over here, but the north still needed to be reclaimed from the Ironborn. Arya watched the city's battered gates one last time, standing with Sansa as columns of soldiers marched out in the early morning light. She felt the same swirl of conflict she'd had when leaving King's Landing the first time, but now she was not alone, and she was no longer the frightened girl. She had avenged her father, rescued her sister, and seen the Boy King pay the ultimate price. They set forth on the King's Road, a smaller retinue than had arrived. Many Tyrell men remained to hold King's Landing. Northerners marched at Robb's side, proud but diminished by the war's toll. Sansa rode in a carriage at first, still frail from her ordeal. Arya rode a horse, determined to greet whatever challenges lay ahead. She glanced back at the city's walls as they receded behind them, recalling the labyrinth of the Red Keep, Baelish's lifeless body in a corridor, Joffrey's corpse on the dais steps. 2 names scratched off her kill list. Others remained, men who had wronged her family. But for now, she felt something like closure. Perhaps her father's spirit could rest a little easier, knowing the realm was free of those traitors. On the road north, the countryside showed scars of war. Burned farms, toppled fences, hollow-eyed small folk searching for scraps. Yet the further they traveled, the cleaner the air seemed, the roads quieter. Arya found solace in the simpler rhythms of riding, of sleeping in tents under the open sky. Sansa gradually regained her voice, occasionally humming a tune or remarking on the beauty of a sunrise. Arya listened, her mind drifting to the possibility of returning to Winterfell, reuniting with Bran and Rickon. She wondered if they would still recognize the girl she had become. One evening, they made camp near a wooded glen. Robb convened a small gathering by the campfire: Sansa, Arya, Halmallen, and a few loyal captains. They spoke of future plans. Once the Ironborn were driven away, perhaps the Starks could truly rebuild the North. Robb mentioned crowning himself not just in name, but in a proper northern ceremony at Winterfell, with the lords of the North bearing witness. The talk comforted Arya. The tragedies were not undone. but at least their family might see a new dawn. After the meeting, Arya lingered by the fire, gazing at the embers. The hound stood nearby, cleaning his sword. He was still with them, though she sensed he might part ways once they crossed the neck. She approached, cautious as ever. He glanced up, raising a scarred brow. "What is it, little wolf?" She hesitated. "Just wanted to say thank you for helping rescue Sansa, for fighting with us." He snorted. "Don't make more of it than it was. I wanted Joffrey dead as much as you did." "Still," she said, tugging on her cloak, "you didn't have to come. You could have fled. But you stayed." He shrugged, returning to his sword cleaning. "I stayed because I'm not fond of running forever. Maybe there's some small measure of honor left in me, or maybe I just like killing scum. Either way, you Starks aren't so bad. Your brother's a decent sort, for a king." Arya nodded. "He never wanted to be a king," she murmured. "None of this would have happened if Joffrey had." She broke off, not wanting to relive that cycle of blame. She studied the hound's scarred profile. "What will you do now?" He shrugged. "Maybe I'll see you to Winterfell, make sure the North is truly free. Or maybe I'll wander the Riverlands. The realm's wide open now. Hard to say." He wiped a final streak of oil from his blade. "But I don't serve you or your brother. Don't expect me to bow and scrape." Arya's lips twitched in a faint smile. "I don't. We're all free to choose, I suppose." He barked a laugh, standing up. "Free. Let's hope you lot stay that way." Then he stomped off to find his tent. Arya watched him go, thinking how strange fate was, that Sandor Clegane, once Joffrey's fearsome guard, had aided in the downfall of the king he once served. In the weeks that followed, they crossed the Neck and learned that Roose Bolton had largely quelled the Ironborn raids, retaking Deepwood Motte and other strongholds. The road home was open. The armies parted ways gradually, with some northern lords returning to their own lands. Finally, one brisk morning, the Stark core party arrived at the outskirts of Winterfell. The old castle loomed ahead, its walls stout and familiar, though repairs were needed where the Ironborn had caused damage. Smoke rose from chimneys, and banners flew from the towers. Arya felt a surge of emotion so intense it nearly overwhelmed her. Here was where she had played as a child, chasing cats across the courtyard, sparring with Jon and Robb. It was a place that held ghosts of better times. But it was also the seat of House Stark, the anchor of their identity. At the gates, guards recognized Robb and ushered them in with cries of joy. Word spread that the king in the north had returned. Bran and Rickon came racing out, flanked by Maester and loyal retainers. Arya slid off her horse, heart pounding, seeing how her brothers had grown. Bran was taller, perched on Hodder's back for support, while Rickon clung to a shaggy, half-grown direwolf. Tears sprang to Arya's eyes as she embraced them both. Sansa joined, sobbing softly, the family clinging together in a knot of grief and relief. Their father was gone, their mother was elsewhere, maybe en route or in the south on some mission, but at least these children of Ned Stark stood reunited in their ancient home. Winterfell's courtyard bustled with new life. Robb's men dismounted, stable boys rushed to take the horses, and villagers peered in from beyond the gates, eager for a glimpse of the returned Starks. Arya felt a wash of déjà vu, recalling the day her father had left for King's Landing with Sansa and her. How carefree it had seemed. Now so much had changed, and yet the stones of Winterfell remained steadfast, a silent witness to time. In the Great Hall, a feast was hastily organized to celebrate the restoration of House Stark. Local lords and bannermen traveled from across the north to pay homage. They found Sansa somewhat fragile but alive, a symbol that the Lannisters' cruelty had failed. They marveled at Arya's hardened demeanor, her sword, her insistence on joining hunts or training sessions. No one questioned it too loudly, not after hearing rumors that she had survived King's Landing and played a role in slaying the Boy King. Those rumors trickled in from traveling bards, forming the early seeds of a legend. Arya dismissed them or grew uncomfortable if anyone pressed her for details. One crisp morning after their return, Arya slipped out to the Godswood alone. She walked barefoot across the soft moss, inhaling the scent of pine and damp earth. The heart tree stood sentinel, its white bark bearing the carved face, red sap tears drifting slowly. She felt a pang of nostalgia for her father who had taught her the ways of the old gods. Kneeling by the pool, she gazed at her reflection in the still water. She saw a girl with sharp angles in her cheeks, hair cropped short, eyes haunted. A girl who had killed 2 men in cold blood, Peter Baelish and King Joffrey. She closed her eyes, breathing in the cool northern air, letting it wash over her. The hush of the godwood was a balm. She whispered a prayer, unsure if the old gods listened to one such as her. She prayed for her family, for the North to remain safe, for Sansa to heal. She prayed that the ghosts of King's Landing might fade from her mind, though a part of her doubted they ever would. And she asked the gods if they truly saw her, for forgiveness or absolution or perhaps just understanding. There had been no other path. A breeze rustled the leaves, a gentle sigh. She felt for a moment as though her father stood behind her, hand resting on her shoulder, telling her that she had done what she must. Tears burned her eyes, but she did not sob. She simply knelt, letting the forest's stillness envelop her. She thought of the kill list she had recited night after night. Many names still remained: Cersei, Island Payne, the Mountain, Ser Marantran. But Joffrey was gone now, and so was Peter Baelish. 2 of the worst had fallen by her hand. Perhaps her father could rest a little easier. When she rose, she felt steadier. She traced a hand along the heart tree's bark, murmuring a soft goodbye, then left the godwood. Outside, Winterfell waited: people, duties, a future. Sansa was meeting with maids to restore her old chambers, Robb was settling disputes among local lords, and the castle bustled with signs of rebirth. Arya joined them, uncertain of her own future, but ready to stand as a Stark of Winterfell, a survivor, a girl who had walked through fire and returned with steel in her hands. The war had changed them all, but for the first time in a long while, Arya could see a horizon beyond endless chaos. The North would rebuild, free from southern treachery. In King's Landing, new powers would rise. Perhaps Marjorie Tyrell would claim the throne, or perhaps another would ascend. It hardly mattered. The Starks were back in their ancestral seat. They had avenged Ned, rescued Sansa, and delivered justice to those who had wronged them. Arya felt the old words echo in her heart: winter is coming, but this time they carried a promise of renewal, the cycle of seasons that brought life after death. She thought of Baelish's lifeless stare, Joffrey's final gurgle, and realized she would always carry those memories like scars. Yet she was a wolf of the North, and wolves learned to live with their scars. She looked at Winterfell's high walls, at the fluttering dire wolf banners overhead, and exhaled a breath she hadn't known she was holding. In her own quiet way, she had found home again. The realm might have endless struggles ahead, but for now, House Stark stood strong, and she stood with it, at peace with the choices that had shaped her fate.